Hi, good evening. Welcome to the November meeting of the Somerville Historic Preservation Commission. It is 6:48 p.m. on November 15th, 2022. I'd like to call this meeting to order. And just before proceeding, I should say that pursuant to Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, this meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission will be conducted via remote participation. A recording of these proceedings can be accessed at any time using the registration link at the top of this agenda. And without further ado, let's do our introductions for those who don't know us. Starting off with Mr. Selby.
Hi, my name is Ryan Selby, resident of Ward 2.
I'm sorry, folks, could I just ask if you're not speaking, just mute yourselves? There's feedback coming through, I think, that everybody's hearing.
Thank you. Mr. Chagnon.
I'm DJ Chagnon. I'm a landscape architect and a resident of Ward 5.
Thanks. Mr. Bauer.
I'm Dick Bauer. I'm an attorney and I was trained as a city planner. I live in Ward 3 on Spring Hill.
Vice Chair Kelly.
Hi, I'm Robin Kelly. I am the Realtor representative on the commission, and I am also a historic homeowner in Union Square.
Thank you. And that leaves me. I'm Eric Parks. I'm the chair. I'm a resident of Ward 3. I'm an architect and historic homeowner. And staff, we have Ms. White.
Yes, I am Sarah White. I am a senior planner in the Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development, and I do preservation and zoning work.
Thanks, everyone. So let's hit our agenda for tonight. The first case we have before us is HPC ALT 2022.60. The address is 394 Broadway. The applicant is Capital Construction Contracting, Inc. And the owner is Alex Condelas. Do we have anyone from the applicant here tonight?
Mr. Chairman, through you, this is Ms. White. For those of you who are going to present on behalf of the owner, would you please use the raise your hand function? And that way I will know that you are here and I can call on you. Is there a member of the development team that is going to be speaking? Please raise your hand. The raise your hand function is immediately to the left. It's the column to the left of your name as it appears. Patrick Foster, your hand is raised. Patrick, I have unmuted you on my side. Unmute yourself on your side.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. If you would introduce yourself and just please remember to always state your name when you are speaking so that we have it for the record.
So, hey everybody. So I am.
Lost you.
Are you there, Patrick?
Patrick? Am I back now?
Yeah, yes, it looks like you're logged in on two places, and that seems to be the issue.
Oh, okay. It was going there as muted. So, hey, so I'm Patrick Foster. I am representing Alex Condelas today with Capital Construction. So I know the scope of work, we're looking at doing a replacement of her existing, not being replaced in kind, but going with the fiber cement James Hardie cedar mill finish. So keeping that still, beautiful look of the cedar mill, looking as close to the existing as possible, but replacing with an option that's a little bit more, longevity proof, where she can get more years out of it without incurring the substantial costs of maintenance on an old building. Is there any way that I could share my screen to just show a few pictures with you guys? Is that possible?
Yeah, if you just hold on for 1 second, what I'm going to do is I'm going to elevate your status, and it will take about roughly 30 seconds or so for me to get that set.
Okay, awesome.
So I'm making you a presenter, and that will allow you to share your screen. Okay, Patrick, you're now a presenter, but it looks like you're muted on your end.
Jeez. Can you guys
go.
hear me now? There we go.
Yeah.
Let's see. Kind of new to the software. What is the option that I can select to share my current screen?
I don't know what it looks like on your end, I'm sorry to say.
It's
I only I can only see what it looks like on my screen. So you should be able to, let me see. Try looking at the top of your GoToWebinar bar, and you might have a gray circle with an arrow that says show screen.
yes, just one moment.
Yep.
Hmm. Here we go. Is my screen visible currently?
Yep, it's just white right now, but it depends on which of your open windows you selected to share.
Okay, let me know. Is everything visible now?
No, it's just a white.
Oh, geez. Tools off. Website. Spare me one moment, please. I'm used to the Zoom, so this is a little different. Let's see. Whiteboard on. It showed me three options. It's either file, whiteboard, or website. Is any of those ones I should click on? I did the whiteboard last time. It showed my screen, but it was all white, I guess.
Yeah, I think maybe you want to choose, maybe you want to go to file. I couldn't tell you for sure. It's a little bit different than the view that I have, but maybe you want to try
Okay.
file and maybe it'll allow you to select a file, but I don't really know.
Let's see. It's into my photo library. I have the pictures. Let's see.
Are they the same as the pictures that you submitted with your application?
No, so there's partially, but I have some further documentation of just other properties in the area that have been done and replaced. So while I figure this out, essentially 445 Main Street, located in Medfield, Massachusetts, they actually went back with the same scope that we are preparing to discuss today. So replacement with the 5¼ inch James Hardie Cedar Mill Deep Ocean plank siding with a 4-inch reveal, which matches the existing. That home, circa 1880, where the Alex Candelas' home is, I believe, it was like 1878 originally constructed. That project, the restoration work, was done in either 2015 or 2017. Came back, they did a little bit more details for the trim, so their corner boards and some other locations they replaced with the Arctic White fiber cement siding. For the trim pieces, but for this project to keep the original aesthetics, we couldn't possibly even dream of replicating the existing corners and dental trim, all the molding and everything, brackets. So those I know we propose to keep in kinds, just sand, restore, and then paint them to restore them to its original beauty. But the actual plank siding I wanted to show, because it really, at least I cannot possibly tell the difference between the two materials being installed. When it's done well, the James Hardie, it really mimics the existing clapboard look that she has on her home, which going with the fiber cement option, not going to expand and contract nearly as much and significantly hardier than the other materials of organic wood, keeping the home in its original beauty, but not having to pay the associated maintenance going with an actual organic wooden material. I'd love to show the pictures though, because it really looks beautiful, and a few other properties that we've done the same exact scope of work. Let's see, I can't see how to.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, if I could just jump in, this is Sarah again. Patrick, just so that you're aware, the The commission is very, very familiar with hardy and cementitious siding, so they are very familiar with what it looks like installed, if that is helpful to you.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll discard the pictures then. You know, for the scope of work to keep the original aesthetic that the home, you know, has. Obviously, you've seen the photos. It's in relatively, you know, very poor condition for the exterior. A lot of degraded wood, a lot of deterioration, a lot of rot along a lot of locations. So, you know, I believe that for our company, taking on the project, doing, you know, the sanding down, stripping, you know, lead safe prep along all locations, really just do a thorough job, and then replacing the you know, the existing material with the fiber cement. I believe, and my company believes, that you can still keep intact the original aesthetics of the builds and just allow the homeowner to not eat the costs associated with the, you know, extensive maintenance. She doesn't live on the property as well, so it is very kind of, it's tricky for her to keep up with all the maintenance associated with, you know, organic natural wood. So essentially, we're just trying to help her out with putting on a material that's going to last. She's not going to have to worry about painting. Will need to be done, but significantly farther down the line, and the home's going to still look in a beautiful condition for as much as possible, compared to replacing in kind with the actual, you know, wooden boards like she has now. I wish I had it's a few photos, but yeah, if that doesn't work, essentially my point is, for the cost incurred for someone who doesn't live in the property and can't be constantly upkeeping with all the maintenance associated with these old buildings, obviously still maintenance will arise, but just significantly less so, that the property in Somerville can be, you know, it's on the main street. A lot of people drive by it. I'd love to have something where it can stay in good condition for as long as physically possible, without having, you know, her deal with all the troubles that arise from the constant maintenance of the existing conditioned material. Let's see.
We're still just seeing your whiteboard. Do you have anything
Yeah.
else to add to that in the meantime? Chair Parks, do you want
I
to
don't think
ask?
so.
Do you want to go forward and maybe ask some questions and go on from there in the event that Patrick can pull up
Yeah.
photos in the meantime?
So my question is, what exactly, you know, are your thoughts on the material being replaced versus keeping the existing? What you know, for the issue, what's the biggest holdback in going with the replacement using the fiber cement versus the in-kind replacement?
Okay, that's you're seeking to use the fiber cement for the clapboards. And just to be clear, you're not looking to all the other wood trim, which there's a lot of, brackets, corbels, corner boards, all that would be existing to remain, or are you looking to replace that?
Those would all stay as remaining. So the corbels, the dental trim along her eave locations, the intricate corner trims that she has, the columns, the railing along the front of the building, essentially all wooden trim along the window locations, the door locations, the outside corners, inside corners, the, you know, all the dental trim, that is all going to be remaining and kept, because we couldn't possibly replicate that. It's always, you know, to keep the original aesthetics of the home, we'd have to do so. So those would be kept, stripped of their existing paint, painted new, you know, liquid wood to be used as, you know, a filler along locations, or along just, there's a few significantly rotted locations. Those will have the material cut out and then spliced in new material in kind. So the same material that was used existing. It's just the siding that's going to be replaced with the new, you know, more durable material going forward. All of the locations for trim, that's what really builds the character of the home, in my opinion. That is all going to be kept, you know, as existing and restored, or replaced identically in kind as needed.
Okay, thank you. Assuming that's all you want to say at the moment, the next step for us would be to take public comment before we address your topic that you brought with us. So without further, let's open the floor up for any members of the public who want to speak about this case. Please indicate and stop.
Thank you, Chair Parks, through you. This is Ms. White. Please use the raise your hand function in order to make a comment. If you are the applicant team, please do not use that function. If you're on the applicant team, then you can certainly speak once the public comment has ended. Let's see, we have. All right, Ron Cavallo. Ron, I have unmuted you on my end. If you could unmute yourself and please provide your name and address for the record. But before you begin, Patrick, I have to no longer make you a presenter. You're going to need to come back into the hearing. We need to share our own screen so that we can share a countdown clock for the public comment. So,
Okay.
okay, sorry about that.
No worries.
All right.
Once he is no longer sharing, if we can be getting up pictures so that everybody who's watching can see the same things that we are able to look at.
Mr. Bauer, sorry, Mr. Chairman, through you. There weren't any photos that that the applicant was able to show. He's having difficulty showing them. So actually we can't show you anything from him.
But we have the photos that were in the staff report.
Yes,
That people who
exactly.
are watching would like to be able to see, I think.
I would direct the audience to go to the reports and decisions page on the city website because the reports are put there. The thing is that we're unable to switch between two people sharing our screen. So I can't show my screen to you because of other things that I have going on. And unfortunately, Raisa does not have those items either, but they are accessible on the city website. So sorry, Ron, I'm going to unmute you again. Apologies for the delay. And Raisa, if you could start the clock when Ron starts, that'd be great. Ron, it's all yours.
Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Ron Cavallo, constituent 70 Victoria Street, and a fifth generation resident of the city since 1894 and a property owner. Everyone's familiar with the Hardie products. The cost for red cedar and wood today is just completely out of sight. And I buy these things all the time, so I know what's happening, and the maintenance and the quality of the lumber is just terrible. My experience with Hardie is if it's properly installed, it looks and painted, it looks identical to wood. And the cost to do these things, repair these structures, labor shortages, the cost of material, which has gone through the roof. I think one really has to be realistic and look to this product as a very good alternative to wood. And given all the issues with wood, I think it's really almost becoming inappropriate to demand it. So that's my statement. I support the use of Hardie, and I think it's great that the applicant wants to restore the existing detail on the building.
Okay. Thank you, Ron.
Okay. Anyone else from the public have a comment? Please use the raise your hand function and I will call on you. Really quick pass through again. Mr. Chairman, I don't see anyone else. You may close the public comment portion of the hearing.
Okay, I'll close the public comment portion of the hearing for this case. And we can take it up as a commission. So it seems pretty straightforward, the request. And you have initial thoughts from people?
I will share my thoughts. So, we generally have concerns about the use of fiber cement siding on historic structures. This is an attached structure where the current siding flows from one side to another without a seam or a stop, which would presumably need to be created to install new siding, because I don't think there will be any sort of interweaving of a fiber cement siding with the wood siding on the attached structure, and any variation between the depth, any dimension of the siding will be very noticeable because of its proximity to the neighbor, the attached neighbor. So that's of great concern to me. And because of the finish on fiber cement siding, hardy plank, it is very obvious when something is fiber cement as opposed to painted wood. So I think that that's, for me, that's my concern, is the dimensions and the profile not being exact, and the finish and the sheen achieved with the finish of a paint versus the factory finish of a hardy plank.
Thanks. Any other thoughts among you?
I'll go next. To me, part of historic preservation is preservation of historic fabric. If somebody came along and said, you know, I want to have a 1911 Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost, you could hire machinists who would build one that was identical to the original 1911 Silver Ghost. But it would still just be a copy of the Silver Ghost. It would not be the original car. And I think, generally speaking, that same principle applies to the buildings in Somerville. I'm not a 100% purist, and I'm open to considering some things under special circumstances. For example, use of non-wood materials in places where otherwise rot is likely to set in. But as a general matter, there's a reason why we would rather have the siding on these buildings continue to be wood, that we would rather to have the original windows be preserved if they could, and so forth, because that's the original fabric, and the hardy plank may look like the original kind of fabric. It may be a very good imitation, but it's still just an imitation. And I think for us to say, well, anytime somebody wants to replace existing fabric with some artificial fabric, with plastic or with cement, eventually our historic structures may look the same, but they're basically just going to be plastic and cement copies of the originals. And I think our mandate goes farther than that.
Thank you. Anybody else have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I very much hear Vice Chair Kelly's concerns about, you know, this particular instance and the matching with the adjacent structure. And also what Mr. Bauer was saying, to some extent, although that gets a little bit into a ship of Theseus sort of philosophical problem of exactly when have we replaced too much. I do note that the design guidelines that reference this most closely are synthetic siding, aluminum, vinyl, artificial stone, or brick, is prohibited because it severely compromises the appearance and integrity of old buildings. And I think nobody would argue with that point, that any of the ones mentioned, you know, they're incredibly obvious. They're very, they're a different method of installation, etc. Hardy plank to me starts to blur the line there. It's still a plank product. It's installed very similarly. You know, I am not, and I will defer to those that are, I am not as familiar with how visually distinguishable it is. But to some extent, you know, if it walks like a duck and looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, is it that different? I think in this case, I'm speaking sort of more generally, because I think in this case, the concerns about the symmetry with the attached structure and so forth, and the historic fabric and the way it's always gone together, to definitely do make a difference. I'm just sort of trying to mull over in my head if this were a detached single-family home or triple decker or whatever, but if it were a detached structure and we were talking about the whole thing, would I have an objection? And I'm on the fence about it. But I think in this case, the general concerns are definitely real. That's my thoughts.
Any other opinions on this?
I would just share to Mr. Shagnon's points. I don't think that it quacks like a duck. I think it chirps, so it's different. And, if you're accustomed to looking at siding, in real estate, I'm, having been through hundreds and hundreds of inspections and looking at properties all the time, I can spot it very easily. And so that's my concern, is that the profile is different, the sheen is different, the way that the seams appear are just different. It gets, the boards are just put together differently. So yeah, it's just, it has a very different look, and it will be very painfully obvious in contrast with the attached neighbor.
I'll have to look into it more on a personal level. Before one comes around where there's not that symmetry issue.
I think that in this, I would say, just to kind of bridge the gap there, that I've seen some very convincing use of fiber cement when they take care to put the smooth side out and they paint it and et cetera. But it's not, the difference fundamentally that it's not a beveled siding. Clapboards are beveled siding and they're the taper. Fiber cement, unless it's been changed recently, does not do that. So it inherently has a slightly different profile to it. So I don't see any way it could be matched with the adjacent half of this structure without it sticking out like a sore thumb, at least that seam. On the other side, I think it is more convincing as a siding than a lot of other options out there. And it's certainly better than any of the cladding, vinyl, aluminum, stuff like that. So there are arguments to be made that way, that in some cases, if one used it in a non-primary facade, for example, the rear side elevations where it becomes less obvious. The other thing that happens is by construction, it's never going to age the way wood would. So initially it looks like brand new wood would have, or similar to it, but 30 years down the line, it's not going to ever develop the patina of wood after having been repainted a few times and scraping and stuff like that, weathering. So in this particular case, though, I don't see how, in my experience, the things that are going to need to be repainted more often are what's remaining as wood anyway. The siding, no matter what the material, is going to be, assuming it's brand new wood that's been back primed and all that and dipped or whatever, they're going to be attacking the window sills and the eaves and the corner boards much more frequently than the siding. And that'll be what drives the repainting jobs in the future. So that's it. There are cases, I'm not quite so didactically against fiber cement if it's done in certain situations. I think in this one, it's probably not the place for it. My attitude. And there is an argument to be made about, using resources and it's recycling wood pulp and stuff like that. So, but that's not really what we're discussing tonight. Anybody else want to weigh in?
I think I share the general opinion of the other commission members, particularly concerned about how the fiber cement would coexist with the property right next to it. I've seen a number of installations where the fiber cement stands on its own on either a larger project or a smaller single family, and I believe that it looks fine, if it's installed the right way, to possibly an untrained eye, someone who's not horribly skilled in being able to judge the differences. But I would really be concerned again, about how it would end up looking, you know, in a situation where it was right next to a property that had regular wood or cedar clapboards, and you tried to stitch the seam together. I'd be concerned about over time how, you know, how that would appear. So that's my bigger concern with this. And as a result of that, I would not be in favor of supporting the application here. Done.
If there,
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, if there are no other particular thoughts, I move that we vote to, in favor of the recommendations in the report, that the replacement of the clapboard shall be made of wood and that the replacement siding shall reproduce the dimensions of the original clapboard, including its relationship to corner boards, window trim, and other architectural details, all of which must be retained. The reveal must also be the same as that of the existing wood clapboard.
That a motion?
Yes, that was a motion to.
Okay.
I second that motion.
All right. All in favor of the motion put forward by Vice Chair Kelly, say aye.
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 Opposed? Let's do a roll call. Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon,
Yes.
Mr. Bauer,
Yes,
Vice Chair Kelly,
Yes.
and I'll vote yes as well. There we have it. Thank you. Okay, the next case before us is HPC DMO 2022.40, 11 Chester Place. And this is, by the way, we've moved from alterations to local historic districts to determinations of historic significance, which is part of the demolition delay review process. Anyway, 11 Chester Place, the applicant is Jim Chen. The owner is Hongying Li. And the applicant seeks to demolish a principal structure constructed a minimum of 75 years ago. Is anybody here from the applicant's group?
Mr. Chairman, this is Ms. White. Through you, I see that Jim Chen has his hand raised. Jim, I have unmuted you on my end. If you could unmute yourself on your end and please state your name and address, and you may go ahead and interact with the commission.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Jim Chen. I'm an architect representing the homeowner, Hong Lee. The reason of, well, the subject property, 11 Chester Place, is currently a 2.5-story, 2-family wood frame construction house. And the owner is proposing to demolish the entire structure, which is constructed a minimum of 75 years ago. Now, the staff report has a very thorough history information about the property, which was owned by a local water commissioner of Cambridge named Charles Kinsley. And the lot was developed somewhere around 1870s through 1895. So the reason here tonight, as the first step for the demolition review process, for the board to determine whether this property has any kind of historic significance, and I'll leave it up to the board to make that decision. Thank you.
Thank you. If that's everything from the applicant, then we would then open up the floor to public comment for this case.
Mr. Chairman, through you, this is Ms. White. For anyone who has a comment to make on this particular application, please use the raise your hand function and I will call on you. All right, Ron Cavallo. Ron, I've unmuted you on my end. If you would unmute yourself and go right ahead.
Am I unmuted?
You are, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, Ron Cavallo, 70 Victoria Street. As I've said repeatedly, I am pro-development for a number of reasons. The largest being, I think, critical economic impact of development, but also the ability to bring structures that are current and energy efficient into the city. It's hard, I haven't seen the staff report, just as I had not seen the staff report on the prior structure. And may I say, I support the decision, the prior decision, having just looked at the structure and seen the greater details of it. But I am going to just make a general statement that I support development, and therefore I would support the demolition of this structure. I'm aware that it has some original detail. I don't consider this building to be significant. And I consider the net benefit of redevelopment of the site an overall net benefit to the city. It's the end of my comment.
Thank you.
All right, if anyone else has a comment, please use the raise your hand function. I will go through the list very quickly once again. I do not see anyone else, so Mr. Chairman, you may close the public comment portion.
Okay, I'll close the public comment portion of this case. And toss it to you all, the commission. Who wants to start off?
I'll start. So while the property has obviously had some modification with the creation of the second unit's entry at the left of the front door, it still is, easily read as the original. The original structure is very easily teased out from what exists there now, and it's among a collection of similar scale properties, and yeah, it's hard to imagine just seeing this get removed.
Thank you.
So I would agree with all of that. The house is quite intact, and it certainly seems to me to easily meet the standards for historic significance. And I would just add to the physical aspects that Vice Chair Kelly noted. We actually also know quite a bit about the people who live there, and they are also part of the history. So I would add that as well.
Thank you.
Just as a point of clarification, do you know much about the people who live there, or just the property owner who appears to have owned a lot of property in the area?
We know a lot about the property owner, but in
Oh no, we
addition,
do have a bunch of information as well. I was further in the staff report than I was remembering.
That's right.
There is quite a bit of info about the various residents who lived in the property. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems very well intact. It has, I'm trying to remember the name of that little clipping at the front. Is that a gherkin roof? Anybody know the term for that? Where you clip the front of the gable?
I think that's right.
Is it jerkin head?
Jerkin head. It seems as though it's not a neighborhood of exact clones, especially with some of the work that's been done up the street, but there's one right across the street from it that is almost a mirror of it.
Mm-hmm.
And going towards Davis Square, it looks as though those houses were all built at the same time, at least looking at the map in the report, it goes back from the early days. Obviously, some of them modified a little bit more than others, but this seems to be fairly intact. And I think it kind of picks up on the rhythm of the streetscape of that end of the street, and that there are 4 or 5 houses of that same kind of gable, same orientation to the street, same setback, and I suspect they were constructed at the same time. And I think that style with the jerkin head, that's not super common in the city here.
Mhm.
So, and we're obviously here tonight just discussing the significance of the structure. This is not a public reserve case, so I think the question here is, does this building contain significance in its own? I would think that it reaches that threshold to me.
Yeah, I haven't said much, but I would agree. I mean, I think especially the little, the what was it, jerkin head roof? I mean, that's an unusual little detail. It's very much clearly, part of an era of construction. We've got the historical association with the original owner, as well as, quite a bit of documentation of the folks who lived there. Seems pretty clear cut on the first step here to me.
And I'm looking at the map from the 1925 Sanborn map, which shows all 5 of those. Actually, all the houses around it were originally the same floor plan.
Yeah.
Rear L with a side.
Yeah.
Who else? Ryan, do you have any thoughts? Albie.
I concur with what I've heard. I think that jerkin head gable is very unique, and I think it passes the threshold for that alone. I consider some of the other properties that we've considered in the past, and this certainly seems to stand out as being significant from a comparative standpoint. So I support the comments of the other commission members.
So
Thank you.
unless anyone else has other thoughts, I'd like to move that we vote to find the property historically significant.
Second that.
There was a motion by Vice Chair Kelly, seconded by Mr. Falvey. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? And we'll do a roll call. Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kelly,
Yes.
and Mr. Bauer has disappeared. Are you here?
It's showing this offline in the attendee. I'm not sure what happened to him.
I've never had this happen when someone disappears between mid-vote.
Mr. Chairman, this is Ms. White. I think that we'll just make a note of the fact that we lost Mr. Bauer due to a momentary technical difficulty, and you'll just note that he will not have voted because he has left the meeting unexpectedly.
Okay, we still have a quorum here for the vote.
You do, yes.
So I vote yes as well. That's 4 to what we consider him not abstaining. He's 4 to 0. Not present. Okay. And then we need to adopt findings. And I think if anybody wants to take a stab at them.
That the house retains a significant amount of its original integrity and massing and to the surrounding streetscape, and features some unusual detailing, including the jerkin head roof, and is also importantly associated with Mr. Kingsley.
I think that sounds good to me. Any other additions or subtractions?
Excuse me for butting in, Mr. Chairman. This is Sarah White. Through you, I just wanted to note that Mr. Bauer now at 7:33 is back in the meeting. So
Aye.
he can vote on the findings.
Go to meeting crashed on me and it made other stuff crash too, but I'm back.
Oh dear.
Okay, so you know, we proceeded without you, so it was a 4-0.
Okay.
Being asked.
Okay, had I voted, I would have voted, been the fifth vote. We're
Okay.
now on findings, and so I heard them from Vice Chair Kelly, and that all sounded good to me. I would support all of those.
Okay. All right. Is there a motion to approve those findings?
So moved.
Okay, I'll second it then.
Moved by Vice Chair Kelly, seconded by Mr. Shagnon. All in favor? Say aye.
I,
All opposed? Do a roll call. Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
Mr. Shagnon,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kelly,
yes.
Mr. Bauer,
Yes,
and I will vote yes as well. So we will be back next month, or as early as next month, with a public hearing for preferably preserved status, where we'll take up, I don't know if the applicant's been through this process before, but we will then discuss whether it is preferable that this house be preserved.
Okay.
And in that, I would suggest check in with staff, and Ms. White will tell you if there's any additional information that'd be beneficial or other aspects to it to discuss. So, thank you for coming to us.
Thank you. Good night.
We have the next two cases. There are requests to withdraw these. Shall we bump these to the end, just so we don't keep people waiting?
Mr. Chairman, through you, you certainly could if you'd like. It would be 2 quick votes, but entirely up to you.
That's true. There's not much to it. All right, just in case the program crashes. Next case, HPC DMO 2022.41, address is 37 Elmwood Street, applicant Jeremy Stivaleta, owners SSD 37 Elmwood LLC. Applicant seeks to demolish a principal structure constructed a minimum of 75 years ago. And there is a request by the applicant to withdraw this application. So I think we just go to a vote on that alone, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, through you, you would make a motion to accept the withdrawal request and then vote.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I move that we vote to accept the withdrawal request.
Second.
Second that.
Seconded by Mr. Falvey. I think you came in half a second ahead. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Roll call, Mr. Falvey.
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Bauer,
yes.
and I vote yes. We're having a feedback issue again. Thank
Yes,
you.
if everyone who's not speaking could please mute themselves, that would help with feedback.
Okay, next case we'll take quickly here is HPC DMO 2022.42. Address is 19 Hanson Street. The applicant is Jeremy Stivaleta. The owner is 19 Hanson SSD LLC, and the applicant seeks to demolish a principal structure constructed a minimum of 75 years ago. And again, the applicant has requested to withdraw their application. Is there a motion to accept that request?
So moved.
Second.
I'll second that.
Gagnon, all in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Roll call, Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Bauer,
Yes,
and I'll vote yes. Okay, so we've moved through those. This brings us to the next category of our hearing, which is determinations of preferably preserved status. And this is step 2 in the demo review process. So these are folks who already before a commission with a significance hearing the previous week or month. And the first of these is HPC DMO 2022.29. Address is 76 Curtis Street. The applicant is Anthony Saratakis. The owner is the same as the applicant, and it's the applicant seeking to demolish both the principal and accessory structure constructed a minimum of 75 years ago. Do we have an applicant for this case tonight?
Mr. Chairman, this is Ms. White. Yes, we do. Although I would ask that the applicant please raise their hand so that I can unmute you. And I have unmuted Yael Getz Schoen. And if you could unmute yourself and just provide your name and address, that would be great. You're all set.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, good. I'm Yael Getz Schoen. I'm the architect for the project. I live in Belmont, 70 Hoyt Road, Belmont. The owner should be on the call, but he doesn't have access to talk to you. But if needed, he will be texting me and I'll see what's needed. Do I need to present anything or we just go right into the discussion?
Is there any new, I mean, you presented the case last month. Is there anything new you'd like to bring to our attention?
No, I can just remind that the owner, he owns both lots for 76 and for 80 Curtis. Both of those have existing buildings on them. And his vision is for, you know, a development that kind of takes both of these lots and changes them. But he plans to keep 80 Curtis, which is a nice house, and renovate that. But ideally to demolish 76 Curtis in order to get the whole development to work. Yeah, and we're just in preliminary, you know, design, so there's nothing that we really can share with you at this point.
So 80 is the adjacent on the left, or?
No, if you're facing the building, 80 is adjacent to the right. And I think in the second report that you had, there was an aerial view with an arrow pointing to the wrong building. So, you know, 76 is not the third from the corner, it's the second lot from the corner.
Okay, 76, that's right. And the 80 is the one that's set back
yes.
quite a bit. So you own both properties. This isn't not, I guess we can't really consider what other properties you own next to it, but thank you for telling us. So your master plan is to combine this site with one next to it, though?
Yes, and subdivide them differently and then, you know, develop them. Yeah.
Okay. If you have nothing else to share with us, then our next step would be to open this up to public comment. And I think I'm not hearing anything else from you, so let's do that. Any member of the public want to speak?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, through you, this is Ms. White. If you please use the raise your hand function, that would be great, and I will call on you. The first person who had their hand raised was Mary Dorora. I hope I've pronounced your name properly. I have unmuted you. If you could please unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yep, you are all set. And if you please state your name and address, please, for the record.
My name is Mary Dorora, 72 Curtis Street. And having lived there for 60 years.
Mary, you're muted. You muted yourself somehow.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I disagree that we can't look at 80 as important in this because he owns both properties. And if he demolishes 76 and he wants to build onto 80, this is going to be a monstrous development. In that neighborhood, the homes are all 75 plus years of value. Having lived there for 60 years and everyone around, all the houses around there are similar in value. Putting up a building would not enhance that neighborhood at all. So I disagree that 80, the fact that he owns 80 is not important. It's vital to this. Because all we know right now is he wants to demolish 76 and also wants to use 80. So how big is this property going to be in a neighborhood that is all 75 plus years? And it was already deemed historical in our last meeting. So nothing's changed, so.
Okay.
That's it. Basically,
Thank you.
that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Sarah White again. I just wanted to provide just a really brief explanation so that folks in the audience could understand. Let me come on screen for a second here. If I can share my webcam. I do understand that that folks in the neighborhood are definitely concerned about the abutting property. But legally, the Historic Preservation Commission can only factor into consideration the building that is proposed to be demolished. So that is why they cannot factor 80 Curtis Street into their deliberations. Their legal obligation is to only look at the building that's proposed for demolition. They are not looking at what the overall future project might be on this site, as that would be out of their purview. But that doesn't mean that they don't understand the concerns of the neighborhood, but we just want to make clear, what they can weigh in on and what they can vote on and what they can't. So that's just a little explanation there. If this does go further in that whatever is proposed in the future requires some sort of relief from the zoning board or the planning board, then there would be a public process involved there. But since we don't have anything submitted at this time, we don't know what that would be. So I just wanted to kind of make a little bit of a clarification there for anybody in the audience who hadn't been through this process before.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
May I weigh in for a minute?
Yes, I guess we're not deliberating yet, but if you have something to add to the subject, yeah.
While our job is to determine about this property and not the other properties, we are at the stage now of preferably preserved, so we can consider anything that bears on whether it's preferable for this property to be preserved, including what might come next if they told us, but they haven't, and the impact on the neighborhood as a whole. Our job is to focus on this property, but this time it's to decide what is preferable, and that's a pretty broad category. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Getting back to public comment.
Mr. Chairman, through you, please use the raise your hand function. And the next person that I see is Jack Connolly. Jack, I have unmuted you. If you could unmute yourself and state your name and address for the record, please.
Thank you very much, Sarah. You hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Jack Conley. I've lived at 17 Winslow Ave here in West Somerville and for the last 45 years, and formerly was a ward alderman for 22 years and at-large alderman for 10 years, and I'm very familiar with this location and the street as I travel by a motor vehicle or run or walk on a routine basis. The character of the neighborhood, I think, as Mr. Bauer pointed out, is certainly a condition that ought to be considered by this honorable commission. And the fact that the owner does own the lot is something to keep in mind. I understand this individual property, as Sarah mentioned, has to be considered, but the long-term ramifications of this could have a major impact on the neighborhood. I don't know if a neighborhood meeting has been held by the ward councilor with the neighbors to attend, or if the owner has presented any plans to the neighborhood. But this particular case, I would ask the Historic Commission, please hit the pause button on this particular matter for the time being, because you may change the character of the neighborhood significantly and the building ought to be preserved as is until there is an opportunity to see what, if any, can be proposed that might be in the best interest of the neighborhood. I'd be very concerned that the owner and the architect do so at a future date with as many neighbors as could be in attendance as possible. I'm very familiar with quite a few of the neighbors on that street, and that I certainly wish to advocate that the Historic Commission take their time on this particular matter, because this could be a major change in the way that neighborhood exists. And I don't think the neighborhood's in the best interest. As Ms. Dora said earlier, this has been a neighborhood that's been primarily the same for many years. It's worked very well. It's one of the best neighborhoods in the community. By all means, let's preserve it as much as we possibly can. 2 units that have 10 bedrooms right now is more than adequate for this individual.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, the next hand that I see raised is Michael DeLulio, and I have unmuted you. If you could unmute yourself and state your name and address for the record, please.
Okay, I think I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, my name is Michael DiUlio. I live at 79 Curtis Street, right across the street from 76 Curtis Street. And most of the homes, I think, if not all of them, and I've lived in this neighborhood just about almost all my life, and I'm not a young guy. Just about every home in this neighborhood is the same, either a 2-family or maybe a 3-family. We don't know what the applicant, at least insofar as I've heard, we don't know what he plans on doing over there, but if he plans on tearing down the existing building and the little accessory use and then reconstructing another 2-family home, that would be fine. It should have no effect on the neighborhood whatsoever. But if he's planning on building something onto this property and then lapsing over onto his adjacent parcel and building, a giant rooming house or something to that effect, and that's going to have a very negative effect upon this neighborhood. And something that I'm sure, as Jack just said, almost everyone in this neighborhood is going to be opposed to. So please take that into consideration, that this neighborhood has been this way for a very long time. It works very well. And if he wants to replace what he has, maybe he feels it's just not up to par right now, that's fine. But we don't want him significantly altering the character of the neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, the next person I see with their hand raised is Patricia Craig. I've unmuted you, Patricia. If you could unmute yourself and state your name and address to the record, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. My name is Patricia Craig. I live at 34 Teal Ave, and I have lived here for about 35 years. Teal Ave and Curtis Street intersect, and anyone who is leaving Teal Ave, which is a one-way, faces 76 Curtis Street. It's right in your face because it's at the very end of our street. It essentially, Teal Ave and Curtis form a T. And so any change to the character of that home would really change our streetscape. And all up and down Teal Ave, owners have chosen to do gut renovations, and they've done wonderful work, but no one has demolished. And when I think through of the past 10 or 20 years, there have been so many gut renovations, and it's beautiful. They've really preserved the historic character of the neighborhood. So I, for one, don't understand why anyone feels like they need to demolish a 2-family when I've seen so many other owners do beautiful gut renovations. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I've seen a hand go up and down, and it looks like they're listed under N. Klagian, and I am going to, I'm going to see if I can unmute them, but I'm not able to because if this particular person is trying to make a comment, you need to enter the PIN or the access code, which is provided on the agenda for this meeting if you're dialing in by phone. So if you can enter that in, that would be great. While we wait for that, Mr. Chairman, I think that the commission has received comments on this that you don't have to read them into the record, but I think that you might want to acknowledge the correspondence that you've received regarding this particular proposed demolition.
Yes, I've seen several letters and a petition that was emailed through. So we have received all those.
And were they in favor or opposed? Just so that
everything I've read was opposed to demolition, or in favor of preferably preserved status, which would be opposed to demolition.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see another hand that just came up. Oh, it's a long list tonight. Okay, so I am unmuting Frank. I believe it's Cucinato. If you could please unmute yourself on your end and then state your name and address for the record, please.
Hello, my name is Frank Cucinato, and my parents and I have the house at 70 Curtis Street, which is directly next door. And I spoke at the first meeting as well. We've lived there since the early 60s, and we basically have 3 generations of our family that have enjoyed that neighborhood. I was opposed to tearing this property down when I first heard about it a month ago. And after I read your historical report, I just thought that this was a treasure that you should really look into a little bit more. It seems like one of the first houses in the neighborhood should be restored and not torn down, you know. That's really the main thing I had to say.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I will do one more pass through the list. And I'm going to see if that last individual has been able to put in their code. If not, we will have to move on. And no, I'm sorry, Mr. or Ms. Kalajian, you haven't put your code in. I can't unmute you, so I'm unable to get you verbally on the record here. I know that your hand is raised, but I can't. You need to put in a PIN. And a PIN has been sent to you, but you need to enter it in order to be able to successfully unmute yourself. I'll give you another minute or so, but if we can't get that, if you can't put that PIN in, I just have no ability to let your audio present to the commission. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but there's no one else with their hand raised, and without you know the access code being put in or the PIN that's been delivered, I can't. There's no ability to unmute this attendee. So I think with that, you could probably close the public comment portion of the meeting for this case.
Okay, thank you. I will close the public comment portion of the case for the hearing for this case. And we can take it up as a commission. I had a question before we go into it. The report we have for this go around, the original builder was that this was one of the first houses in this neighborhood, as I recall from the staff report that we originally had in this, but I'm not seeing it in our current kind of the updated report for this.
Mr. Chairman, through you, that is correct. Any information that was noted in the historic significance report, you would have to look to that report. It won't be repeated in the properly preserved report.
Okay. Who has initial thoughts on this? Actually, before we discuss too much, I think we just need to clarify that, because there was this case of, we are the Historic Commission, our role in this particular case is, it was a discussion of whether we should consider the neighboring property and all that. And there's definitely a common sense to that, but we have a somewhat narrow, we're not the zoning board. We're voting to see whether this particular project, this site, both build the main primary and the accessory structure, whether it's preferable that we preserve them. And we don't, for those who don't dabble in our commission meetings a lot, we don't really get to go too far into eventualities and what might come there. I mean, as Mr. Bauer said, it is a comparative process. It's preferable to something else, but a person can go through this process without telling us a single thing about what they intend to do with the property, and it's their right to do that. It's just they want to demolish it. And so, it's nice that we can weigh it against other options, but that's not a requirement that we know what those options are. And so, yeah, that's some background. Anyway, does anybody want to start off with some thoughts on this?
I apologize. I have to step away for a few moments. Hopefully I'll make it back, but
okay.
If not, vote without me.
I will share that I think because of all the reasons that we found the structures to be historically significant, I think those also support the property, the structures being preferably preserved. That there aren't any kind of extenuating circumstances about the properties that suggest that they can't continue to be, standing or updated. That it makes sense for them to remain.
Thank you.
I would second that. This property is both in itself as a building and as part of the more general neighborhood. It seems to be an important building, and nothing that I have seen has persuaded me that it would not be possible to preserve it.
Thank you.
I don't have anything to add. I concur with Vice Chair Kelly and Commissioner Bauer on their views and opinions on this.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Ms. White again. I noticed that Mr. Bauer disappeared. Mr. Bauer, are you still there?
I am still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Yeah.
still hear you. That's good. Thank God.
Go to webinar. It seems to be kind of problematic. I cannot see any of you.
Oh, delightful. Well, that might not be the worst
And
thing, I
I
suppose.
cannot see my own picture, but it sounds like you can at least hear me.
Yes, thank God. Okay, because I thought if you dropped off, then we would have to
We'd
put
have to
this
go
vote
on.
aside, but you can continue. So I just wanted to make sure of that for the
No, I am still-
the record and procedurally. So thank you.
Yeah, so just to recap that, the significance is that it's a fairly intact, I actually am more partial to the garage and back too. I think has a lot of integrity. I know it's not the primary structure. Its relation in the neighborhood, it's not among a collection of clones. It is a gable structure. It faces the street, as most gables structures do in this city. It's obviously there's a rhythm and just in that scale of structure in the area. And I believe there was the builder, there was actually some significance to that, the original owner, and I was just digging back from my staff report for the significance and I couldn't find it, but I remember that was a factor for us. The original owner and the developer of that site was kind of an early bigwig in that neighborhood. So that's really my contribution to this. Does anybody not weighed in here?
If there's nothing else, I propose or I move that we vote to find the property preferably preserved.
Sorry, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, if I could really quickly through you, you will have to call the vote on each of the structures separately on the property. So the principal structure and the outbuilding as well.
Thank you. I move that we vote to find the principal structure historically, preferably preserved.
I second Vice Chair Kelly's motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Vice Chair Kelly for preferably preserved status, seconded by Mr. Falvey. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we'll do a roll call. Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Bauer,
Yes.
and I will vote yes as well. And we need to establish findings, which is, I think we could kind of recap what we discussed earlier. Does anybody want to come up with some of those? I think we're dealing with integrity, streetscape, position on the streetscape, carrying the consistency of form. Is that correct? And its association with important, how do we phrase that in guideline standards? Important association with historic person.
It was
important person.
Yeah, and it was one of the earliest structures in this neighborhood.
Yeah, I think that's probably more important than actually the builder. It's just that it predates most everything around it.
I move that we vote to adopt those findings for the principal structure.
Second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Bauer,
Yes.
and Mr. Chagnon, you were not present. Are you abstaining?
I'm going to abstain, yes. I wasn't.
Okay. And I'll vote yes. So we have 4 yes, 1 abstaining. And now I need to take, oh, sorry, continue.
I was going to say that I moved that we vote to find the garage structure preferably preserved.
I second that.
Mr. Bauer, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we'll do a roll call. Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Bauer,
Yes.
and I'll vote yes. Oh, Mr. Chagnon,
I'll continue to abstain.
abstaining. Okay. Okay. Thank you, applicant.
Do we need findings?
We didn't do, for the previous, yes, right.
For the
Right, the garage structure. Well, I would say integrity and that it's a good, let me pull up the image again, but it's a good example of an early 20th century, late 19th century garage structure. There's a lot of integrity.
I move that we vote to adopt those findings.
Second the
I
motion.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The roll call, Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Bauer,
Yes.
and I'll vote yes. Oh, and Mr. Chagnon.
I will continue to abstain.
Okay. Okay, well, as the applicant, as you continue to develop your project, you'll want to work with staff and go forward that way. Okay, the next case before us tonight is HPC DMO 2022.32, address at 17 Hudson Street. The applicant is Nicole Black and Michael Petit.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'm going to try leaving the meeting and restarting my computer and seeing if I can get GoToMeeting to work any better. So now that Mr. Chagnon is back, you have a quorum without me. So I will hopefully be back in a minute or two.
Okay. The applicant we mentioned is Michael Petit, owner, same as the applicant. The applicant seeks to demolish a principal structure constructed a minimum of 75 years ago. And this is a determination of preferably preserved status, as was the last case. Is anyone here from the applicant's group?
Mr. Chairman, this is Ms. White speaking. Nicole Black is here for the applicant. She is also one of the owners. Nicole, I have unmuted you. If you could unmute yourself and please provide your name and address for the record, and you may go ahead.
Hi there, my name is Nicole Black. I'm Michael Petit. And we are the owners of 17 Hudson Street, husband and wife. And we would like to also introduce Matt Carlson, who is the architect we've been working with, who is going to present a quick overview of our structural engineer's report for the house and then our plans for a single family home. Thank you guys, appreciate it.
I have unmuted you, Matthew Carlson. If you're unmuted, please provide your name and address and association with the project, and you may go right ahead.
Hi there. Again, my name is Matt Carlson. I'm the designer working with Nicole and Mike on their project here at 17 Hudson Street. Just to verify, can everyone hear me okay? Okay. My address is 364 Canosa Avenue in Haverhill. And if it's possible, I'd like to share my screen so I can walk through some slides for you guys.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, through you, this is Ms. White. Matthew, I am going to make you a presenter. That'll just take a few seconds. And once you are a presenter, you will be able to share your screen. One of the things I will tell you, though, is that when we go to public comment, we will have to demote you from being a presenter so that we can allow one of our staff to share their screen for the countdown clock. Once we do demote you, you will have to log back into the meeting. We apologize, but that is just a quirky function of GoToWebinar. So you should be able to share your screen now.
No problem.
We can see it.
Okay, great. I will go to presentation mode. Okay, so as we're all aware, obviously we're here to make the determination of whether or not the structure at 17 Hudson Street is preferably preserved. So we just kind of wanted to throw this out at the beginning to kind of set some context for everything that we'll be talking about, that in order to make the determination, we're here to decide whether or not the demolition of the building would be detrimental to the architectural, cultural, political, economic, or social heritage of the city. And so here's just kind of a street view of the property and the abutting properties to the left and to the right. Some exterior shots of the house itself. The detached garage was already deemed to be not significant, so not really showing images of that as it's not really pertinent to this. I think not too much to speak to in regards to the house itself, other than kind of, you know, things that have come up in some of the reports as far as exterior siding, you know, the the maintaining of the historical and architectural significance of the house itself. You know, what we see when we look at it is something that's kind of, you know, repetitive to other structures in the neighborhood, nothing that quite stands out too much on its own as sort of making this a architectural beacon of sorts within the neighborhood here. And over time, as either through repairs or whatever else, you know, especially on the backside, we can kind of see some patching of different siding types, which we believe to be aluminum. I think some of the reports have it written as wood, which there might be some patching of wood in there, but we believe there'd also be wood siding as well. But in general, you know, we see a lot of kind of, you know, mixing and matching of different brick colors, whether it's painted or natural brick. You know, the different porches from the rear porch to the front porch. And, you know, just in general, as far as the detailing itself of the structure, any sort of significant detailing of the structure, which we kind of highlighted here. You know, these are sort of minor features that we see as significant. It leaves a little bit to be desired, and we think ultimately with what we're proposing for this property, we're actually suggesting that it's making some significant improvements to what is here. And so we also just want to touch upon the structural analysis, which has been submitted to the commission as well. You know, I think the general idea with this structural report is not necessarily to fight it to the degree that, you know, yes, if you have the right contractors, the right builders, and, you know, enough time and money to put into the project, you know, just about all of these things can be remediated to a certain degree. But I think it's important, especially for Nicole and Mike's sake, that we really point out, you know, for them, it's of critical importance that, you know, this house, for their sake, you know, really stands the test of time, is well built, maximizes really kind of life safety from a fire hazard aspect, and you know, just general structural integrity sense, and just general longevity of the house, and, you know, energy efficiency, and really kind of the complete package of, you know, what things that they would like to avoid with potentially having to, you know, patch and, you know, sister joists or whatever work may need to happen to kind of bring this structure back up to, you know, its proper self. So some images from the report here. We've also included from that report, you know, just kind of a list of what the structural engineer deemed as either immediate concerns or near future concerns. And I think, especially in the sense of, you know, trying to, you know, renovate this house, if that were to be the case, you know, I think it's really kind of not much of a difference between the two. I think this whole list would, you know, need to be remediated and taken care of in order to make this really the safe space that they want it to be. So that's really kind of just the gist that we wanted to sort of point out as far as the structural analysis is concerned. Is, again, not to say that these things cannot be taken care of, but just with the time and money and energy that goes into it to ultimately, you know, still potentially be left with some issues down the road is a concern. And just to have, you know, for Nicole and Mike, this is going to be a long, you know, a long-term home for them, something that they hope to grow into and have a family in. You know, as a, you know, this is not something where we have a developer coming in hoping to, you know, build, you know, three dwelling units here to rent out. They want to make this a long-term residence for themselves and have this be a really nice, well-built single-family home that they can use. just a quick site plan comparison for the proposed design relative to where you can see the red boundary line here, the existing house and the existing garage footprint in red. So you can kind of see what we're proposing and just sort of the shifts that come from that. And I think the biggest takeaways from this is to, from the front side, really orient the proposed structure to really kind of center this front bay window on Waldo Street, which is an intersecting street, to kind of have that be a focal point at the end of that street, and also pull the garage and rear portion of the existing structure away from that rear property line to kind of help reduce congestion along the rear side of the property and really kind of give them some real estate back in their rear yard to make it just more usable for them. So I'll kind of go through these, if need be, we can come back to, but just to kind of give a gist of sort of what we're proposing for the exterior, for the detached garage relative to the house structure itself. And really all I would say, I'll kind of let these images speak for themselves. But what I would say for the proposed design is that, again, as far as Mike and Nicole wanting this to be a long-standing home for their, for them to grow a family in, since the beginning, they've been very respectful of the historic context of the neighborhood, and they really want to pull from, different similar structures in the neighborhood to bring some historical context to this design. So it's certainly not their intent to build something, even slightly modern. They're very much interested in sort of keeping the historical context to this property and to the neighborhood. And I think in general, we haven't gotten too deep into the weeds as far as detailing of, trim work or corbelling or rake details, things of that nature, but we're certainly open to input if it does come to that from the commission as far as, introducing certain details to the project, whether it be on the front porch, the railings themselves or the corbelling or, roof edge details. But, again, we're trying to bring some of this detailing to this project that we see throughout this neighborhood. And we have kind of a couple examples of similar structures immediately adjacent to this property with the sort of spire tower on the front. And different roof lines, sort of different approaches to the design in that regard, but all still fairly similar to what we're proposing. And just as kind of a last slide here to touch back upon trying to be respectful to some really nice examples and respecting the historical context of the neighborhood. And ultimately we want to try and bring some of these sort of finer ornate details to the project. And again, that's something that they've certainly been respectful of. So yeah, I think as far as the proposed design, they just want this to be something that they can really make their own and call their own, while maintaining the historical context of the neighborhood and just have it be a well-performing and safe place for their family. So I think I will leave it at that.
Thank you. Is there anybody else from your applicant group that is going to be speaking, or should we move on with public comment?
I'll leave that up for Nicole and Mike to jump in, but I think that's all I have to say at this time.
All right, thank you. And in that case, I will open this up to the public comment portion of this hearing.
Mr. Chairman, this is Ms. White. Thank you very much through you. So sorry, this is the point where I have to kick you off, Matt, and you're going to have to log back in again because we need to we need to get our screen back so one of our staff members can use it.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Technological shortcomings.
Understood.
All right. Just give me a second here to get this done. Okay. All right. Now that that is set, Raisa, you can go ahead and share your screen. For any member of the public who would like to make a comment, please raise your hand. I am going through the list. Ron Cavallo, Ron, I've unmuted you. You know the drill. Just say your name and address for the record, unmute yourself, and you are all set to go.
Ron Cavallo, 70 Victoria Street, Somerville, Mass. I'd like to publicly state that I think the design for this site is remarkable and incredibly positive. I think the structure makes a very strong attempt to be a truly beautiful building that harkens to other houses in the neighborhood. Living in the city of Somerville should be a positive experience, and folks that are willing to build a structure of this kind, in my opinion, should be fully supported. I also note that there doesn't seem to be any public opposition, unlike one of the prior proposals, against the redevelopment of this site. I want to repeat, I think the design is remarkable, and I fully support this redevelopment of the site. End of comment.
Thank you, Ron.
All right, anyone else with a comment to make, please use the raise your hand function and I will unmute you. And go to the list once more. I don't see any other hands raised, Mr. Chairman. You may go ahead and close the public comment portion of this case.
Okay, I'll close the public comment portion of this case. And we have obviously an interesting situation where we have a set of renderings that, and I think probably any one of us would agree is a suitable replacement if it is to be replaced. If we vote against, this is one of these philosophical things, if we vote one way or another, nothing obligates the applicant to build that. So this is that question with this situation, like, well, I would say that's, my opinion is that is a, if we're weighing the options there, that's building. I think there might be some zoning issues to do with its height along the side there.
Right.
I believe the applicant needs to take another look at that because I think would be considered a 3-story structure on the side there. That's something that staff would obviously could clarify. But in any case, that issue notwithstanding, the structure that's there is a fairly standard front gable building that has siding on it, replacement windows with a porch, and it's not quite of the same era as the ones around it because I think it was not a single developer that did the whole street as in some cases. It's a slightly different setback, slightly different, slightly larger lot. So before I continue, let's see what the rest of you all think on this.
I'm happy to jump in. I think, the things that have always struck me about 17 Hudson, and full disclosure, I live not far away, so I know the property really well. I remember the previous owners sitting out on their front porches and so forth. The things that have always stood out to me are the way it sits on its unusually large lot. And I don't think that the proposal, and to Chair Parks's point, nothing obligates to build exactly that and so forth, which is its own philosophical question. The proposed structure pretty much echoes that. I mean, it's shifting it a little off center, I get, but putting the big tower element, as a design choice aligned with Waldo makes a lot of sense. The thing that struck me was the garage structure coming so far forward is going to change the rhythm along the streetscape a little bit. You know, it'll make the building on its site a little less unique. I don't know. But other than that, you know, the structure as it exists, as Chair Park said, it's fairly common for the neighborhood. There's a few others like it, you know, up and down the street, some of which have been modified a fair bit. And there are a lot very similar to the sort of structure that's being proposed. You know, the others are more 2.5 story typically rather than 3. Yeah, I don't have a lot of reservations exactly, because I can see the poor shape that the house is in and the amount of work it would take to restore it. And I can see the argument for, you know, at a certain point, is it actually preferable to preserve this particular structure? I don't know. But on the other hand, there's that question of, you know, it is preferably preserved, preferable as compared to what, as Mr. Bauer has said before. And I don't know that there's a vehicle in that other than, you know, if we were to vote preferably preserved, that then opens, you know, the 18-month window in which there can be a memorandum of agreement, which I think is our vehicle for giving input into what might possibly replace it. Right? Am I correct in that?
Yes.
In theory, if this were to be declared preferably preserved, we could then in theory work with the applicant on a memorandum of agreement. Not that we necessarily are wanting to go that route, but.
Well, that was the usual thing.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing here, the spirit of what they're proposing, my sense is we would come to an agreement fairly quickly about what replaces the building.
So also.
But yeah, look like you're saying something, Mr. Bauer.
I have been reluctant to endorse, but maybe this is an appropriate time for it, and that would be a determination of not preferably preserved with conditions. That is, if we think we know enough about what the conditions are, that under which we would accept demolition, we could allow the demolition on those conditions, and the conditions then would be part of our decision. I've often been reluctant to do that because I often think that we need more time, but maybe this is the exception.
So even though the applicant has presented drawings, they've not gone through zoning or anything like that. So we don't have anything approaching sort of ready to go final designs for us to speak to in terms of conditions. So I'm not sure how effective that would be.
And perhaps not. And when we have dealt with this before, we have not confronted the possibility that those conditions could not be met. That is, if we said, we will allow the demolition if you're going to do essentially this project, and then it turns out they can't do this project, then our allowance of the demolition is undone because it was conditioned on that, and they would then have to come back to us, I think. But I want to ask staff about it because we've never confronted that possibility before.
Mr. Chairman, through you, this is Ms. White again. I'm going to share my screen so we can have a more meaningful face-to-face conversation. So with my bookcase, apologies. So could you repeat the crux of your question again so that I understand exactly, Mr. Bauer, what you're asking so that I can give an appropriate answer?
Sure. So we have often determined property not to be, we've often determined to be preferably preserved, not necessarily with the expectation that we would ultimately save it, but to then move us into a negotiation with the proponent, which could result in a memorandum of agreement on which we would allow the demolition and to go ahead provided those conditions were met. So we've done that many times, and that's pretty
Yes.
settled. We have sometimes shortcut the process by determining a property to not be preferably preserved with conditions. So I understand that a shortcutting of the same process. We would say, we will allow you to go ahead under these conditions.
That is correct.
We have not answered the question of what happens if those conditions can't be met. My assumption is if the conditions are not met, then the determination of not preferably preserved is undone, since it was a package deal.
Correct.
And so,
may I ask a clarifying question?
I think as
go ahead.
Being posed here is, if we were to say, we like your project, we will determine the existing building to not be preferably preserved on the condition that you build essentially this structure to replace it. And it turns out they can't do that. They then can't meet the conditions. So what happens then?
Right. Yeah, that is where it gets to be certainly a sticky wicket, because this has not gone through ISD. It hasn't gone through zoning review or anything like that. Although I did have a discussion with my colleagues in ISD, I forget it was yesterday or this morning, about just the renderings. Now, to be clear, the renderings don't have measurements. They don't have anything like that on there, but they are good. They give good idea, a conceptual idea of what their intent is to build. And the initial response from my colleagues in ISD was that there are definitely some zoning dimensional compliance problems with what they can see so far, particularly with the number of stories in some places. 3 stories are not allowed in this zone. You're allowed to have 2.5 stories. So those are some issues. Even though we know that there are existing structures that look very similar to this, those are built at a different time under a different code, even before zoning, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a different thing entirely. So yes, we cannot say for sure that this exact building will be built as it is. When we go through the memorandum of agreement process with applicants, I do spend many months going through iterations, design iterations with them. And certainly I can look at it at that point from a zoning standpoint. I can never give a sign off because I'm not ISD, but work in conjunction with ISD, we can give them much clearer guidance as to the zoning viability of their project. So we do spend a lot of time doing that under normal MOA circumstances. What we have tended to write into conditions of a memorandum of agreement when specific plans for a new build are involved, not a rendering, but actual specific plans, is that we allow for minimum changes to the plan to accommodate zoning considerations that can't be foreseen without a full zoning review, but minor changes. And those minor changes are then incumbent upon staff to determine whether or not they are minor. What we would be looking at for, if we were to say something like that in this case, preemptively, I don't know what, because we just don't have enough detail, I don't know what I could reasonably infer could be like a minor change. Certainly changing windows and some fenestration and things like that, yeah, minor changes. You go from like maybe eliminate a 1/2 story here or there. Maybe, I don't know, it would really depend. So, and I believe that the conditions that are set forth in the not preferably preserved with conditions are specific conditions, and typically they don't involve plans for rebuild.
That was going to be my question.
Yeah, it's the MOA process where we go through
my sense is this is just way too preliminary in terms of these drawings. We don't know whether the applicant is wedded to this particular conceptual drawing, or if this is like the general idea of what they're thinking. And then all of the issues that Ms. White has just outlined with ISD, zoning, et cetera. So I would not be comfortable assigning conditions right now. I'm much more comfortable indicating that this is preferably preserved, that we want to be sure that this building this site is treated well, and that historic is going to have input as to how it gets done. So I'd be much more comfortable going our more typical route of declaring it preferably preserved, and then the owners will be able to work with staff to create a memorandum of agreement that can be tweaked according to, however it is that the sellers are wanting, the owners are wanting to adjust their designs and taking into consideration ISD, zoning, et cetera, and then everybody can kind of work together to create the happiest outcome.
I was going to raise the point that Ms. White ended on, the fact that the language that I'm seeing, granted it's in the staff report, but I assume it's an excerpt from the statute or something.
Right.
Is that the structure at location do not meet any of the criteria to be preferably preserved. The HPC may add any or all of the following as conditions. And there's a list of 4 that are photographic documentation, architectural renderings of the building to be demolished, identification of materials for salvage, and/or a plan for installation of historic or interpretive signage. So I think that that's written as an exhaustive list. And
That
if
is
we're
correct.
doing conditions, it's simply about documenting the original property and not about what replaces it. That the
is
vehicle for replacement memorandum of agreement. So,
And this is all, of course, assuming we even consider it preferably preserved, which
well, yes.
I would tell you, I'm not entirely convinced that I would fall that way anyway, because of the physical structure, but I think I would probably take the more traditional approach that Vice Chair Kelly suggested, and Mr. Chagnon pointed out, it doesn't even seem that we can even consider design review in this process. Attaching that to conditions. That goes back.
So
Somebody
then
have feedback from?
I was going to say that goes back to the question of, is it preferably preserved?
So Chair Parks, were you intimating that you potentially have concerns about the structure from the structural report, or?
Oh, no, I read the structural report. There's nothing in there. Yeah, there's
No.
stuff, the posts, the typical things, fun repointing and stuff.
It's an
Nothing in
old
there that's, yeah, it's a thorough report. I appreciate that, they gave us that. It's better than some. No, I was just saying that I'm not convinced that I, at this point, would even consider this structure preferably preserved because of its just character. I'm on the fence about that. So, and if I don't, then this discussion of how to handle this plan, this is kind of a moot point.
Sure.
If we did vote preferably preserved status, I think that it would move pretty quickly to incorporating whatever the ultimate design becomes. And it seems like their applicant is on a path that would be a pretty harmonious with our desires once it passes through planning and gets massaged that way. So I don't see this the kind of thing that would drag out forever.
Yeah.
No.
I do see the property as being preferably preserved. There, while it's had years of deferred maintenance, clearly, and it needs a lot of help. There didn't seem to be anything completely irredeemable noted in the structural engineer's report. And I do think that the placement of the property or the structure on the property and its character being set back, those are all really lovely aspects to it. And so I'm not convinced that the property should be demolished. So I would be in favor of considering it preferably preserved.
Who else has thoughts on that first subject of preferably preserved status? Mr. Falvey, what do you think?
Oh, not really. It's a tough one, actually, I believe. Not feeling necessarily that there's a need for preferably preserved for that, in the context of what's being planned too, but I know I have to separate that from the actual property itself as it stands right now. So I don't feel strongly, but I would not come out and say I feel strongly that it needs to be preferably preserved. I'm flexible in my opinion on that.
So I will take the position that, along with Vice Chair Kelly, that it's preferably preserved. I think it is all intact, although it's had new siding. The fenestration is there. The building, the bones are all there. You have no trouble looking at it and understanding what it looked like when it was new. And it's also consistent with the other buildings on the streetscape. So I think it is easily determined to be preferably preserved. I'm sorry, yes, to be preferably preserved.
I'm finding myself in that question of preferably preserved as compared to what? And in the specific case of what's being presented and Nicole and Mike's stated intention and the architect's stated intention, I don't see an issue of it, but there's nothing particularly binding about that. So then in the absence of that, and not accusing anyone of any nefarious intent, but there's, in the abstract, then preferably preserved as compared to what could in theory go in its place if someone wanted to sort of maximize the lot out. And when the building was up for sale, the typical tear down and build something that fills the maximum allowable by zoning of the lot was what I was afraid of. And it's definitely preferable to preserve the existing building than that. But but as compared to what's being proposed and what I trust and hope Nicole and Mike and their team plan to follow through with, becomes more borderline. But I guess on that, looking at it in the abstract, I'm leaning towards preferably preserved, mostly on the philosophical, what we're able to judge it on itself basis, with the fairly strong feeling that we're likely to pretty quickly come to an agreement about something that would be appropriate to take its place. That's where I'm falling.
Okay. We've all spoken. Are we ready to vote on this then? Anybody else want to wait to offer some thoughts?
I will move that we vote to find the property preferably preserved.
Wait to Mr. Bauer. Is he coming back in the near future?
Yes, I'm here and I second that.
Okay, you're paused, it says here.
I believe he just paused his video.
Just paused my camera.
Okay.
But I'm here.
All right, so we have a motion by Vice Chair Kelly, seconded by Mr. Bauer, to vote on preferably preserved status for this. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All
No.
opposed.
Opposed.
Okay. All right, so we've got a split ticket. We've got, do a roll call. Mr. Falvey,
No.
Vice Chair Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon,
Yes.
and Mr. Bauer,
Yes.
and I'll vote no. So we, 3-2, we have a preferably preserved status in your, we need to adopt findings before I whiz past that. And I'll let one of you, yes, people propose findings.
Mr. Bauer, I always like when you do the findings.
Well, I would include in the findings the structural integrity of the building, the massing, the fenestration, and its relationship to the streetscape.
I move that we vote to adopt those findings.
Okay, we have a motion by Vice Chair Kelly, seconded by Mr. Bauer. All in favor, and I refresh my memory, if you vote against it, you can still vote to adopt findings, or is that considered crass?
You could still vote.
You could, but it's antithetical to the way you
Yeah.
voted to
I mean, it's
not
kind of like with,
the building.
well,
Yeah,
like with minutes where we approve minutes even though, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so all in favor, sorry?
I was going to say, though, the findings are a statement of the sense of why the commission voted the way that they did, not of their
Correct.
personal feelings on the matter necessarily. So,
Well, so therefore,
Well,
right, those of you who had voted in favor of that the building should be preferably preserved would then be theoretically supportive of those findings unless you had others to add to them. And those of you who didn't think the building should be preferably preserved could not possibly justify the findings since you don't think the building should be preserved to begin with. Either way, assuming that the three people who voted in favor of
Right.
preferable preservation also vote to adopt the findings will be adopted. Yes.
It's interesting if the finding vote failed though on, anyway.
well, due to a disagreement, I mean, I'm not convinced about the fenestration particularly, but
All right, well, I will stick to, where are we? We have a motion seconded by Mr. Bauer. All in favor of adopting that motion?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? I'll say no. And we'll do the roll call, starting Mr. Felvey,
No.
Vice Chair Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon,
yes.
Mr. Bauer,
Yes.
and I'll vote no. So, and as the applicants here, it looks, obviously, if your intentions are as you presented, I think you'll just work with the commission as you move forward to any zoning issues you have and move to prepare MOA, work with staff and on that. And I think that's the way it'll go.
Quick point of clarification, if I could, Mr. Chairman, that essentially the applicant will work with staff first. And then as far as once we get to a point where we think we have an MOA we can bring to you all for you to vote and accept, we can do that. But they'll work with as much as we can ahead of time with staff on the zoning issues. And then ultimately, it will be not the commission that works on the zoning issues, but it'll end up being ISD in the end when they do present their plans. So as I think these folks are all new with doing this, so I just wanted to make a small point of clarification about that point.
Yeah, that's interesting because it used to be in the old days that you would start off by coming right to the staff to work with a project, but now it seems to be that you need to go through an application through ISD before it even gets considered by staff. How does that?
When it comes to zoning stuff, yeah, it does. So this is the MOA process makes it a little bit different in that, we have more upfront zoning questions, or staff does, with ISD, with my colleagues in ISD, just because we want to make sure that we're pointing, applicants in the right direction. But yeah, you're right. When it comes to any other type of proposal that would come forward, it all goes to ISD first, and they tell you if you need relief and then ship you over to the Planning, Preservation and Zoning Division to get you through the boards and commissions. So yeah, it's a little bit different. Change is always interesting.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. And the last case tonight is one for which I must recuse myself because I live within 300 feet of it. So I'm going to turn the chair over to Vice Chair Kelly for 63 Putnam Street. And if you can just let me know, I'm going to use this moment to read the minutes so I'm not lagging behind you all.
Great. So we will move on. We will move on to HPC.DMO 2022.37, 63 Putnam Street, applicant FL Development LLC, owner James Sareva and Philip G. Sareva Sr., representatives of the estate of Joseph Sareva, and the applicant seeks to demolish an accessory structure constructed a minimum of 75 years ago. And so at our last meeting, we found the structure, the carriage house type structure, to be historically significant. And so now we are determining whether the property is preferably preserved or not. Is the applicant here, or anyone from the applicant party?
Yes, Madam Chair, through you. This is Ms. White. I have Adam Dash, who is the attorney for the applicant, and we have Adam Glassman, who is the architect. So I will unmute both of the Adams. I will just beg and plead that you both use your first and last name each time you speak. And so Attorney Dash, you are unmuted, and Mr. Glassman, you are unmuted. Attorney Dash, you may go right ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. Attorney Adam Dash, 48 Grove Street, Somerville, representing FL Development LLC. Also, Sarah, with us is Fraser Allen, the manager of FL Development, if you could promote him, and Sinarith Kong, a structural engineer from TLH Consulting, if you could also promote them as well. Thank you.
Sure. If I could just really briefly, Vice Chair Kelly, through you, Attorney Dash, who will be sharing their screen to present plans? Because I will need to promote them one at a time.
Well, it's not really plans because we're looking to demolish the garage. We're not looking to do anything with the house. So other than photographs, I don't have plans per se.
Okay. And I think the commission has already seen the photographs, which is fine. So what I'll do is I'll just mute the other folks, Fraser Allen.
That's it, yeah.
And okay, because you had said promote, and I thought, okay.
Well, let me make it. If there are questions, I'm going to call on them to answer them. So
of course, absolutely. And the last person was Sinarith Kong.
Correct.
Sinarith, you're going to have to put in. You're going to have to add in a pin. You're going to have to punch in a pin that has been sent to you. And that is the only way I'm actually going to be able to unmute you, because you're calling in, and that pin serves as your access code to unmute yourself. So it has been sent. All right, Attorney Dash, sorry, go right ahead.
Thank you, Ms. White. I will talk while Sinarith tries to get in. This application relates, as I said, only to the demolition of the existing garage at 63 Putnam. We are not seeking demolition review of the house. As the staff report states, the garage was built in 1884, then enlarged in 1895, then added on to in 1925. So it had sort of these consecutive additions put onto it. Applicant has had Todd Healy, a structural engineer from TLH Consulting LLC, write a report after inspecting the garage, which was included in the package. Sinarith Kong is from that company. Todd was not available tonight, but sent someone else from TLH. And from that report, you note that the garage has a noticeable roof ridge sag, brick and mortar deterioration at the base of the wall is noticeable, areas of rot at the base of many wood framed walls. The existing roof rafters are severely rotted. Many of the main frame beams are split and rotted. Most of the structure is supported by wood shoring in areas of framing sistered with lumber. The summary is, I got a quote from the report, there is an overwhelming amount of temporary structural items supporting the original structure, so much so, it seems the original structure has little to no capacity to support itself. If not for the temporary works, it is our opinion the structure would have collapsed by now. So, as you know, October 18th, the commission found the garage to be significant. We're here to talk about the preferably preserved piece. We would note that due to its poor condition and structural instability, it is not practically preservable and in any real fashion. Again, please note we're not seeking a review to demolish the house tonight. I have the photographs queued up, although I don't particularly want to get kicked off this call by showing them to you if you have them in front of you. I know there was a discussion, if one looks at the first page of the report, there was the older part that's marked west on the right of the picture, and then there's sort of one of those additions that's marked south. If you look at the picture to the lower left on the staff report, or depending on which staff report, one is the main one and the other one is down in the lower left, but the one from the street, you can see that the garage tucked back there, you don't really see the south thing at all, and you only see about half of the west from the street, for what it's worth. With that, I mean, I guess the question really is what we're going to do about this at this point and what the practical point of preferably preserved would be. Again, I have the structural engineer here. If you had any more specific questions, though, I think the report's fairly definitive. The client's here, who's the prospective purchaser of the property. It's not my client who let this fall to this condition. It is the condition it's in that we are seeking to purchase. Again, just talking about the garage. So, so we're not looking to replace the garage with anything. So I don't have plans to show you in that regard. I would note that demolishing the garage will provide more open space for people on the property and does bring the property more into compliance with the green score and open space of the zoning ordinance for what it's worth. But that is sort of the situation in which we find ourselves. And we would hope that you would not find it preferably preserved. Thank you.
Thank you. And so with that, if there's nothing else from the applicant group, then is there any member of the public who would like to speak on this?
Madam Chair, through you, this is Ms. White. I am rolling down the list as we speak. Ron Cavallo's hand is raised. Ron, I've unmuted you. If you could unmute yourself. And actually, oops, just 1 second. Raisa, if you could get the timer up on the screen, that'd be great. I'm sorry, Ron, to put you on hold there for a second. Once that's up, you will be good to go. All right, Ron, go right ahead.
Ron Cavallo, 70 Victoria Street, and a frequent contributor as a long-term resident of the city. I've dealt with structures of this kind a number of times, and when they reach the state, from what I can gather from the structural report, it becomes economically unviable and a huge burden on the constituents and the taxpayers to demand that a structure of this kind be salvaged. It's easy to say, oh, it's got architectural significance. It's very easy to say, especially if one's not paying to restore a structure of this kind. And from what I can gather, it would compel the constituent, the owner of this property, to what would be, in my opinion, an undue burden to restore a structure that's in the current state that it's in. And one has to consistently and realistically look at the economic burden of some of these structures, especially if they are not wonderful. This is not wonderful. I'm coming from the perspective of supporting development, renewing the housing stock in the city, increasing the tax base, whether you like that statement or not. That's where I'm coming from. But I'm also coming from a very practical perspective. And that practicality compels me to say that I think it's a burden to put on the constituent to preserve a structure in this state of disrepair. The structural report should be considered significant and valid, and I believe has tremendous merit and should be fully incorporated into the decision making. I therefore support the removal of this structure. It's the end of my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Cavallo.
If any other members of the public have, excuse me, have a comment that they would like to, pardon me, Madam Chair, to add, please raise your hand. Use the raise your hand function. Madam Chair, I see no one else. You may close the public comment portion of this case.
Thank you. We will close the public comment portion of this case. And commissioners, share with me your thoughts.
Well, I'm happy to go first. To me, this feels like, unlike the previous case, a very good case for not preferably preserved with conditions. I think that there's some amount of architecturally interesting merit to the structure, but as you know, as the applicant stated, as Mr. Cavallo stated pretty well, it's pretty darn far gone. It's preferably preserved. You know, I don't know that it quite meets that bar on its own, but I think that some sort of, you know, documentation of what's there, as primarily I'd say that the first three, I don't think there's any need for historic or interpretive signage, but, you know, photographic documentation and architectural renderings that sort of capture the way that this structure had spoken to the primary house. Seemed like that's, you know, a relatively easy way to document it for the record. And then I don't know if there is anything that could be salvaged. I mean, Attorney Dash has stated that the applicant currently has no plans to replace the structure. And I don't know that there's any one particular detail. I mean, if you took the existing structure apart, there aren't, you know, unlike say the Holman's building where we have the, you know, cast concrete monuments or something that could be salvaged. I don't know that there's anything here material wise that feels worth salvaging to me, but that's where I lean in that direction.
Thank you. Mr. Falvey or Mr. Bauer?
I think the most architecturally interesting part of the carriage house is the front facade that mirrors the main house. But as we have learned, that's not actually original to it. That was not the original carriage house. That itself was added on, although added on a long time ago and long enough to be considered for preservation in its own right. But looking at the pictures, it's basically just the framing. There's no detail there that could be preserved in any form. It's not like one would take that down and say, look, the front of this, we recognize it when we put it on another building. So, so it seems to me that although it had some significance, it is hard to say that it's preferable to preserve it.
Mr. Falvey, do you have any thoughts to share?
No, I mean, for all the reasons that were eloquently stated by Commissioner Chagnon and Bauer, I would not be supportive at all of declaring it preferably preserved.
Yeah, I'm in accord with everything that Mr. Chagnon and Mr. Bauer have discussed, and in terms of conditions that exactly what Mr. Chagnon outlined, that it, you know, signage doesn't seem appropriate, but perhaps photographs and drawings. So in that case, if no one has other thoughts to share, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we find the property, the garage structure at 63 Putnam Street, not preferably preserved, with the conditions that there be photographic documentation and architectural renderings recording the building to be demolished.
So, Madam Chair, if I just be clear, that you're talking about the garage, just the photos and architectural drawings of the garage.
Correct.
So, thank you.
Second the motion.
Thank you. All those in favor of...
Actually, can I ask a question? Given that part of the relationship is to the existing building, I wouldn't ask for architectural renderings of the primary structure to be included, but photographic documentation that captures that relationship. So, you know, I guess if the main house shows up in the photos, that's a good thing.
Adam Dash, understood. Sort of like the photo we have there on the front page of the staff report. Okay. Got it.
So we will amend the motion to include that little extra nuance. All those in favor of finding the property not preferably preserved with the conditions Mr. Chagnon outlined, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And everyone said aye, so we have no opposed. Mr. Falvey?
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon?
Yes.
Mr. Bauer?
Yes.
And I also say yes. And so then for findings. Anyone want to share thoughts on findings?
Referencing the engineer's report, it just said beyond repair. And that seems to be kind of the crux of what the justification, at least from what I've heard.
That the building is deteriorated and not considered to be structurally sound, and therefore is not preserved. Does that make sense?
Wonderful wordsmithing.
I would entertain a motion.
I move to accept the findings as stated.
Second the motion.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Falvey?
Yes.
Mr. Shagnon?
Yes.
Mr. Bauer?
Yes.
And I will also say yes. Okay, so then, so Ms. White, staff will draft the conditions for the applicant so that they can follow those prior to removal of the structure.
That's correct, Madam Chair, through you. So in the decision that that staff will be putting together, the conditions that they must follow will be added to that decision document. And that decision document will also need to be uploaded to CitizenServe, which is also a standard condition, irrespective of what you add, so that way ISD is aware and they check with us too to make sure that the conditions have been met. Right or wrong, I definitely know how to get in touch with both Mr. Glassman and Mr. Dash, and they certainly know how to get a hold of me, and I have no doubt that they will get it done.
I don't know how that would ever be wrong, Ms. White, but no, it would be fine.
Depends on the amount of work involved.
Understood.
All right, very good. Yeah, we'll get this done, and we'll get the conditions met.
Much appreciated. Thank you, members of the commission. Have a good evening.
Thank you as well. And with that, we will bring back Chair Parks. Are you in the wings?
Yes, let me put myself back in here. Hello.
Hello.
Visible?
Hello.
Let me turn the volume back up. Okay. So you just dispatched with the last case. And all we have left are meeting minutes, I think, and a CPC update. Who's read the minutes, or you need a couple moments to look at them? I would say whoever. What was that?
I said I'll fess up to needing a few minutes to read them.
We also had the staff approvals, Eric.
Yeah.
I don't know if you need to go over those, but that is listed.
Yeah, let's look at those. I would say whoever wrote up the September meeting minutes deserves some kind of medal for endurance.
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, through you, that was probably Emily Hutchings. In fact, I asked her to take minutes at a meeting that I held today because she's just so darn good at it.
Yeah.
Never be too good at something like that because it's a dastardly job, as all of you know.
Especially when it's meeting minutes.
So so if I could, the staff level approvals is just a list of what has been done. So they have already been taken care of and they've been dispatched with, as the saying goes. And so that's just an FYI for all of you. There are many more that have come in since, but a lot of them are in the queue. Mr. Chairman, do you by any chance want to discuss CPC while other folks are perusing?
Sure. Although Mr. Bauer was our official representative of the last CPC, I was also a lurker.
So thank you, Chair Parks, for being there. So as you know, the biggest task of the Community Preservation Committee is to figure out how to allocate funding, and the CPA funds can be used for affordable housing, for parks and open space, and for historic preservation. The Community Preservation Committee takes off essentially half of its funds and turns it over to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for affordable housing, and then the trust fund makes those allocations. So the CPC only has to worry about the historic preservation funds and the parks and open space funds. The money for those gets divided three ways. At the beginning of the year, the committee sets aside funds earmarked for historic preservation, and they set aside funds earmarked for open space. This is before any applications are made. And the Somerville CPC has chosen historically not to allocate all of the funds to either of those categories. So some of it is kept back as flexible funds. Since it hasn't been allocated, it can be spent in either of those categories. This year, the requests for funding dwarfed the amount of money that was available. Is it possible to give me sharing privileges? I will put up a couple materials for people to take a look at. So while that is going on, I'll mention, so applications came in this fall just before I came on to the committee. And our process essentially over the last 3 months of this year, which is the end of my interim term, it's all focused on having those funds be allocated by the end of the year. We make sure that I'm doing this right.
And when you're done, Mr. Chairman, sorry, through you, when you're done, Mr. Bauer, I will just ask you to stop sharing your screen and I won't kick you out.
Okay, are you able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so I can, I've never done this before using GoToWebinar, so I can't see in GoToWebinar what you are seeing. So I'm just going to assume that you are seeing the same thing that I am seeing on my screen here.
Just so you know, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, Mr. Bauer, Mr. Chairman, through you, we're seeing the Excel spreadsheet and it's titled CPA Application Summary 11/10/22.
That's right.
Okay.
And this is up on the CPC website. You can go back and look at these materials later yourself, but I wanted to give you at least some flavor for what is in front of the committee. So I'm going to take you through the different requests, but let me first just show you the funding. So if you look in column C, row 17, that's funding that's available for historic preservation. I should mention that in several of these categories, there's more total funding, but in previous years, the committee has decided to bond in order to put money up front for some projects. So work at the West Branch Library, for example, involved bonding because it was a lot of money and it was needed then, not spread out over time. So the committee with the city council approval bonded for that. It means that every year we have to pay the interest on those bonds out of the historic account and that leaves less money available during the year to spend for other things. Similarly, on affordable housing, although you're not seeing it here, the city has bonded for a couple of projects for affordable housing, and that means that money comes off the top from the affordable housing account each year. And so what you're seeing is what remains after making the payments on those bonds. So there's $451,000 in the historic preservation account, 773,000 in the open space and recreation account, and 386,000 in the flexible account. That's money that can be used for any combination of historic preservation or open space and recreation, with a total available then of 1.6 million. Everybody with me on that so far?
Yes.
Okay. So if you look at the requests, and we'll go look at the breakout in a minute, but if you look at column O, line 17, you can see that the requests for 2.6 million for historic preservation, 1.1 million for open space and recreation, for a total of 3.7 million in requests, which is more than twice the available funding. There's a gap of 2.1 million. And what all of that is going to mean is that the committee is going to have a lot of hard choices, because it can't come close to funding most of this stuff unless it chooses to do bonding. And if it does bonding, that means less money available in out years.
Can I interrupt a second? Well, how much are we, what is our bonding amount right now? What you're saying is not included in that 451. So that 451 is the net after we reduce.
Right. So it is in the CPC report. It's not, I don't think, on this spreadsheet. So I can't tell you what that is. It is hundreds of thousands, but it is not more than that.
Okay.
I could see if I can find that in the report later. But for the time being, just take that as a given. It's already committed and therefore not available here. So now that you have sort of the overall picture about available funds and requests, let's look at the actual requests themselves. So in the historic preservation category, you can see that Elizabeth Peabody House, which has come to the committee several times for funding. It's a nonprofit, and it operates out of a former church on Broadway, right near Foss Park. And they are seeking $300,000 to do window restoration. And those are stained glass windows, so it's expensive restoration work. The Grace Baptist Church building, which is not a current church, it's owned by the Somerville Hispanic Association for Community Development. It's a nonprofit. The space has been used in the past for things like a homeless shelter, a daycare center, a food pantry. I think it is still a food pantry. It's also now a Jewish afternoon school. And so they've also come to the CPC a number of times for restoration work. The building was really in very bad condition and has needed a lot of work to be brought back online. And they are asking for 1.367 million. The Somerville Museum, which has also gotten a number of rounds of funding, and has now been sort of large, the building itself has been largely restored, and they've added a new wing in order to have an elevator in it. And they're looking for $197,000, primarily for preservation of artifacts, which include things like some paintings, also includes the Bullfinch staircase. The Adams Magoon House is a privately owned house. It's one of the oldest houses in the city and a real landmark. It's on Broadway right near Magoon Square. Magoon Square is named after the Magoon family, after whom this house is also named. And they have done a serious restoration plan, and they are looking for $463,000. 90 Union Square, which you probably don't know by that name, but you would probably know as the old fire station, which has been the community media center in Union Square. And there's money to restore the building, through, as I understand it, through Union Square, but they are looking for $297,000 to restore the clock tower and the clock in it. And Mudflat Studios is looking for $15,000 to do a study to restore the facade of their building, which is the old Broadway Theater on Lower Broadway. We just stop and see if you have questions about any of those. Obviously, this is at a very high level, and we're not going to do a complete review of everything, but I want you to have some feel for what the applications are and what the projects are. Moving then into the open space, the Blessing of the Bay, which runs along the Mystic River, and they're looking, this is a joint nonprofit and state agency application for $250,000. And the right-hand column says narrow road to expand the park, but this is a much bigger project to essentially redevelop that park. They've gotten funding from the CPC in prior years to do studies, and now we're talking about actually doing a lot of the work in it. Junction Park, also known as Somerville Junction Park, which is right off Central Street along the railroad tracks. The park is sort of in the middle of the block. It's a passive park, but the new bike path will run through it. Next to the park is a parking lot, which was the parking lot for the Verizon office. And then for the last, excuse me, few years has been a staging site for Green Line construction. As that is now mostly done, the parking lot is available, and the city's asked for $400,000 to turn that area into an extension of the park. They've gotten state funding, but need a match for it. Two more on here, Henry Hansen Park, which is a small park on Medford Street named after Henry Hansen, who was a soldier from Somerville who was part of the invasion of Iwo Jima. Did I get that right? I think.
I think so.
Yeah, and the famous scene of the lifting of the flag up on top, and Henry Hansen was there. So CPC in prior years had put up some money for a study. There's now $350,000 for construction work. Again, they've gotten state money that called PARC, P-A-R-C, is state funding, but there needs to be a match for it. And then finally on 217 Somerville Avenue in Union Square, not far from the Target store. This is right now a parking lot, and the city is asking for $100,000 to do planning to turn that into a park. There's very little parkland in that area. So those are the projects. I should note I've gone through and given you column O, which is what people are looking for, but they were also asked to do a phased scenario. They said, if you couldn't get it all this year, what would you want, particularly this year, and what would you do with it? And so a number of the proposals have these phase scenarios saying, well, if we couldn't get it all, we really need this much this year, and then maybe we'll come back in future years. And the bottom line, as I noted for all of this, is $3.7 million or $1.9 million in the phase scenario, with a total of 1.6 million available. Eric, do you want to sort of, you've been watching this in with last meeting, do you want to share any thoughts on this?
On just the, am I allowed to? Or at some point we said we weren't really allowed to deliberate these things.
Well, we're not deliberating, but we were reporting on what the CPC is doing, and particularly as we're doing these funding things, it has impact for our work as the Historic Preservation Commission. That's why we get a seat on it, and as people can see, they're looking for a lot of money for historic preservation. People may have thoughts on it. The ultimate decision about how to cast our vote belongs to me as the rep, or Eric as the alternate if I couldn't do it. But feedback from the commission would be helpful for us if people have it.
Yeah, it was really kind of, I don't know if it's sobering, but seeing so much need or desire for funding on all this, and like you said, there's a tiny little bucket of it. I'm very wary of. That's why I was asking about the bonding. I'd hate to have a situation where we keep not wanting to deny funding and then suddenly discover 5 years from now we don't have anything left to give out because it's all been loaned in perpetuity. So, I mean, to me, the critical things are things that have to happen where there's property at risk. If something's about to fall apart, that's the most critical thing. If it's something that can sit there and wait for 5 years or whatever, even though it's a great project and I'd love to see it happen, but if it's not really in the way of life, and if it can sit there and wait, I would give them secondary importance. But I haven't really formed, like, if you had to tell me which ones were the priority, I hadn't really decided how I would do that yet. Looking at this, I should take more of a thing. Is it something you and I had to discuss at some point, just to go over that, or how are they gonna? How does this get presented to them?
So at the meeting, which is tomorrow, I think we are having preliminary discussions of it. Let me see if I can get to the agenda. Is everybody seeing the agenda?
Yes.
Or are you still seeing the spreadsheet? Seeing the agenda?
Yep.
Okay, so so you can see what's on the agenda besides some housekeeping stuff, like the review of the CPA fall report. One of the things that we started to do on the CPC when I was chair was to start issuing regular reports, so people could see what we were doing, and it helped us to keep track of where we were on what we were doing. So as part of a continuum and not just a bunch of separate individual decisions. The two major items, one of them is a Q&A with the Spencer Preservation Group. They're the architectural firm that is working with the Grace Baptist Church to answer some questions about that application. And then number 4 is beginning deliberation. So we have almost an hour to do that. And then at the December meeting, the expectation is we will actually go through and make decisions and allocate funds. So that's where we are in the process. We are now beginning to discuss it. At the last meeting, all the applicants came to us and made presentations about what they were doing. This meeting, we will start the deliberation, and at the December meeting, the expectation is we will actually finish that and make the allocations. So it's all done before the end of the year. Do other folks have? I'm sorry, go ahead, Eric.
Did I hear correctly? There was somebody that dropped out from the list who admitted defeat, or what I call it that. One of the projects.
Oh, yeah, so, so on this spreadsheet, you can see there were two, and number 8 and number 9.
Okay.
Those are both private applications for significant amount of funding. I think they would likely have had rough letting to demonstrate why that was enough of a priority, given the other applications and needs that are reflected in both the open space and the historic preservation. So those two are withdrawn. There had also been some other earlier pre-applications where people dropped out and didn't even get as far as the application. I want to look through the fall report and see if I can answer the question about, okay, so here's the debt service stuff. This is, can people see table 1? The fall report, is everybody seeing that? Are you all able to see that?
Yes.
Yes.
So you can see that for historic resources, the debt service is $131,000. So there's
Okay.
579 budgeted for historic preservation. 131 comes off the top for debt service, leaving 448. And for affordable housing, there's 1.9 million budgeted, but 314.5 comes off for debt service on the 2 long-term projects that got done with bonding to enable people to get the money up front. So, for example, it enabled the city to get a big leap ahead on the 100 homes campaign, which is to buy 100 homes on existing market to take them off the speculative market and keep them permanently affordable. And they were buying them in dribs and drabs as the CPC was able to provide money. And they said, you know, if you give us a whole lot of money up front, we'll buy a whole lot of houses up front. And we know that, you know, every year we're going to get less on an ongoing basis, but we'll have these buildings up front. I think also a similar thing happened on the redevelopment of the Clarendon Hill public housing development to put the money up front. So those are the 2 that have debt service. And so you can see what's there and then how much is left after those get paid for. I have not heard anybody say anything about bonding any of the projects that are here today. In the 3 times we've done it, there were really special reasons to come up with a lot of money up front and then pay for it over time using debt service. But
okay.
somebody could come and say, you know, we should just do all of the Grace Baptist Church now and get it done, and we'll bond for that so that the money's there now, even though it means we'll then have less money in the out years because of debt service. I've not heard that from anybody, and I don't expect it. Any other thoughts, Eric?
No, I don't think so. Priority wise, 15% is the lowest they can give somebody, right, of the 3 groups?
Right. So at the beginning of the year, when the CPC did its plan, which was before I was on, they did these allocations, which you can see in the second column, where the beginning of the year put this much money aside for open space, this much money for historic reserves, this much money for community housing. I think that 10% is the lowest that any of them could be. So a city could say, we're going to keep 70% of the funds flexible and decide how to spend them. The Somerville CPC has chosen to pre-allocate in these ways: 20% for open space, 15% for historic preservation, 50% for affordable housing, 5% for administration, and then the line marked budgeted for is just money that's not allocated, what could be put into any of those categories.
Have we, in your experience, been the lowest, the bottom of the list consistently, or is it just?
In the first few years, we said 15% for open space and 45% for affordable housing. So that left 20% in the flexible funding category, the budgeted reserve. And then, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years in, we decided to reallocate and put more, a little bit more into open space and a little bit more into affordable housing. So that, at this point, we could not change that for this year because that's in the plan that was committed, but next year CPC could decide to change those numbers, could decide to increase some of them, could decide to decrease some of them. But it has, just bear in mind though, that it has limited impact because I don't want to make it sound like it has no impact, but the impact is limited in that since there's money in the flexible funding, we could choose at this stage to, for example, put all of that 10% into historic preservation, which would push historic preservation up to 25%. So we still have a fair amount of flexibility.
And Mr. Bauer, when the applications come in and they're running, the requests are running at 6 times what is budgeted, does that influence anyone? Like the open space requests were coming in at, 1.5 times what is available, but historic was coming in at 6 times what's available. So that suggests that there's considerable need for more historic funding.
And I think this is now going back probably 4 or 5 years, but when the committee decided to increase open space from 15 to 20%, I think that was part of what did it, is that at that time, open space requests were coming in large consistently, and historic requests, which had been significant at the beginning, had sort of dropped off. So that the 15% was actually probably pretty close to covering it. And that's when the committee decided to increase the open space allocation to 20%. So people could decide when they do next year's plan to change those and say, we're now getting huge requests for historic preservation relative to open space, and we should push historic up, or we should push open space down. But that will be a decision for next year's CPC. At this point, the questions that are these percentages are given, and the question that is before the committee at this point is how to spend that money given the list of applications that I showed you. So Eric had mentioned that one consideration that he thought was important was to think about sort of the urgency of the request and whether there were things that were sort of more urgent, for example, because they were needed for stabilization, and then other things might be things that could be held for out years, and that seems to me to be a reasonable kind of way of thinking about some of these. A variation of that for me, I think, is at the Somerville Museum, which needed a lot of money and needed it on a fairly urgent schedule as they were doing major renovations, and particularly constructing the new wing. When I say wing, it's not a huge wing, but just they had to build a wing on the front of the building to house the elevator because they couldn't get it in the envelope. And it was my feeling at that time that we needed to just get this done, that there was no favor to anybody to say, we'll give you half of the money that you need this year while it sits, and then we'll give you the other half next year, that we ought to stretch if we could to get that done so that it was done. And then conversely, and here again, I'm speaking just for me, now that that is done, that funding for some of the museum's other projects seems to me to be a lower priority. Not that they're not important, but they are lower compared to other things. And they are also lower compared to what I thought was the urgency of getting, the elevator done, the windows restored, the roof restored, the things that that either went to the integrity of the building or basically needed to all get done up front because there was no way to think about the projects in halves. And so for me, at least, support the Somerville Museum. Funding their projects this year is a relatively low priority compared to some of the other things.
Yes, those are paintings to get restored that are sitting happily in a storage place someplace. It's not like they're going to fall apart next year if they don't get restored.
Yeah, I mean, they're not actually sitting happily. So one of them is sitting in a conference room, and because it is falling apart, they basically can't use that conference room in the meeting because they don't have another place to put it. Or at least that's what I was told about it. But restoring a painting to me is not the same priority as getting an elevator in so people can use the building, or getting a roof done so that we don't get further damage to the building.
I think maybe it would be useful, I could even do this, to prepare sort of a matrix of things that could be criteria in evaluating this. There's the public benefit, there's urgency, as we just discussed, there's, fairness, if they already received a whole bunch of money, they already had their shot at it. There are like 4 or 5 factors we could just sort of come up with a little thing for each project and say, which boxes does this one check off and how does it rank, that way to make it a little more empirical, I guess. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Got some whittling to do, obviously. And the meeting's tomorrow.
Meeting is tomorrow, but we're not making the final decision. We're just beginning the discussion. We note also, in terms of priority, in the green and open space, it's mostly public applicants. So it is possible to say to the city, 217 Somerville Avenue is a great project, but we don't have $100,000 for planning, so you'll have to find it someplace else. Or we know you want to go ahead with Junction Park and Henry Hansen Park, and you've already gotten the park funding, you need a match, but unfortunately there just isn't enough in CPA compared to other needs, so you'll have to go find it yourself. Whether the city will succeed in doing that, I don't know, and that obviously takes money away from other things. So a lot of this is moving money from one pocket to another to get what we think is the optimal mix of outcomes.
Does anybody else have any thoughts or observations on this? Opinions?
I like your idea of having some sort of like criteria or checklist of, who's received funding. What I absolutely agree that whatever is like priority or something's falling apart seems to take precedent or be more important than like restoring a painting or something like that. So I fully support that. Actually, I don't have much time. I got to drive out to Wellesley tonight too. So if we're going to be done in a couple of minutes, I can hang out for like 5-10 more minutes. But I can't wait for another half hour to tonight.
Okay. So, that's okay, Ryan, and thank you for flagging that. I just wanted to give people a bit of a picture of
it's helpful, Dick. I appreciate it.
Is doing, and if people have thoughts on it, please pass them on to well, actually, I was going to say, please pass them on to me and Eric, but I want to ask staff. I don't know whether people can do that because they would really be weighing in their capacity as HPC members. So actually, why don't you pass them on to staff rather than to us, and then staff can figure out if there's some way to then communicate that to us that still complies with the open meeting law. And then we will have a discussion. I assume that our December meeting is also before the December CPC meeting.
Mr. Chairman, through you, I believe the December meeting is December. Hold on, let me double check. It's either December 15th or the 20th. It is December 20th. It's the December HPC meeting.
December 20th, which is actually, I think, after the CPC meeting, I think.
It might be. I don't really know what that December schedule looks like for CPC.
Okay. So I'm going to suggest that if people have thoughts to pass them on to staff, and then staff can figure out whether they can communicate them to me and to Eric, or whether they can just communicate them to CPC staff, who can then present it to the whole CPC, and we'll get it that way. So I'm not sure the solution, but I'm going to suggest passing it on to Sarah and Wendy to then figure out how to get that information to the CPC.
Yep, definitely. I would say definitely send it to me. Wendy doesn't, well, so one, Wendy's on vacation right now, so don't bother sending it to Wendy right now. There'll just be one more thing she has to go through when she gets back. So just send it to me. And right now I'm the only one of us who deals with CPA related things. So just send it to me and I'll make sure that I discuss with Roberta Cameron, who's the CPA manager, as Mr. Bauer was saying, and we'll figure out what to do with any comments that you have. And we'll get it done.
Okay, good. Thank you, everybody, for taking time to hear about this stuff and to raise your concerns with us. So
Thank you, Dick, again for your willingness to serve on that group again. It's really helpful.
Thank you.
All right. Should we hit the minutes quick before we all fall asleep?
Yep.
Has everybody had a chance to read them? All 112 pages of them.
I know. I read them. They all look wonderful and perfect. No, I didn't notice.
I only
anything.
have comment on October.
So I had comments on a few things. Vice Chair Kelly, did you say you had some?
October.
Which ones are we talking about now?
So we have, I think, July, September, and October.
Oh, September, October, yeah.
Which ones are you commenting on first?
I have comments on October.
Okay.
Oh, should we just start there then and just tackle that one?
So for the October minutes, under administrative business, where it says Vice Chair Kelly announced her professional association, it's Coldwell Banker, not Caldwell Banking. And Cavallo is misspelled.
In October, I noticed, or do you want to keep going, Robin, with your comments?
That was it for me.
Okay. I noticed one spot, which I just found, where we refer to it as workforce housing. Okay. We use workforce housing someplace instead of worker housing, which is a minor detail, but.
So I had two specifics in October, and then one general one, which I think applies to earlier months as well. So let me give you my specifics first. So in, this is on page 4, it's the discussion of 635 Somerville Avenue. I was going to count bullet points. If you look down about halfway through the bullets on public comment, there's a one that with my name, it says Mr. Bauer stated. And that's actually missing the critical words. It should stay, Mr. Bauer stated that although, and here are the missing words, it was not necessarily relevant to the determination of significance, comma. So the whole sentence should say, Mr. Bauer stated that although it was not necessarily relevant to the determination of significance, as an individual and member of the city, he's distressed that residents have been given no notice. So the critical language missing is, it was not necessarily relevant to the determination of significance. And then the last bullet, the last black bullet, our second last black bullet, says Chair Park stated that he saw this as a particularly good example. And I think it, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, you meant to say this is not a particularly good example.
Yeah, that was on my list. That was, and I went on to vote against it. Yeah.
So those are my two specific comments. My general comment is that whoever is taking the minutes, which are otherwise very good, is not being careful about the motions. So it's not clear often who made the motion or who seconded it, or sometimes even what the motion is.
Oh, yeah.
And where it is listed, it is often made as a bullet point rather than as part of the motion. So if you look at the first one on 50 Bow Street, there's a bullet point about what staff said, and then Vice Chair Kelly made the motion. But the motion is just listed there as a bullet point when it's the critical thing we're doing, and then we haven't said who seconded it. So the motion really needs to be separate so that somebody can look at it and say, here's what the commission did. And I thought that was a problem in many places.
I will echo that. It's through you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bauer, I will echo that. We have had many discussions with a variety of folks, when they're, taking minutes and notes for us, that it's like, everything else is great, but if you don't have the motion, if you don't have the vote, if you don't have the second and the findings, then we might as well not be reviewing that, because that is absolute essential key information for every single board and commission. So yeah, your point is well taken. And I will actually use this opportunity to state that it was actually called out by the HPC, because it's an issue with other boards too.
Okay. As you all may remember, it's my opinion that for most of what we do, we don't actually need to have motions, but if we're going to have them, then I think they need to be stated, and we need to say who made them and who seconded them.
Okay.
Correct.
One other little structural thing of maybe less profoundness. So I'm looking at the same case for 635 Somerville Ave under public comment. And I think this is the fault of the structure, where public comment, there's stuff in there that wasn't public comment, but perhaps it came up as a discussion where we responded to someone's comment. If we go to page 4, where we were before, it starts off with Ron Cavallo, preservation staff, et cetera. And then before we know it, Chair Parks asked the applicant, it's kind of like, how do we want to put that? Did it indeed get discussed during the public comment portion? And would you put things that I say as public comment, or would they be put down below on a different bullet category?
I think, so that's one of the things that we can certainly talk about with, the structure of it with the person who's taking notes. Sometimes we have different styles with note takers. So sometimes they do it where it's like, a back and forth, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that, et cetera, et cetera. Some tend to chunk it out more between like discussion amongst the commission versus discussion with, that's just public comment. I think that for this, as long as we get what is correctly public comment in public comment and correctly commission discussion in commission discussion, and if there is any back and forth between the commission and the public, which there isn't often, then we'll make a note of that. But if there's if you have a question about if they got that correct, then I will have the folks who did the minutes and then tidy them up, go back and go through that section again.
But I do want to make sure whoever's doing it gets credit for doing a really good job capturing the information. I could not come remotely close to that, and I've given some criticisms, but I also want to make sure that they get credit.
Sure. Oh, no. They did. Yeah, no, I know. They do a very good job. Yes. In the grand scheme of 100 and something pages, it's not so bad.
Yeah, this would ruin my day having to generate this, so glad someone else did it.
Yeah, I can't say getting volunteers is easy, but we all need to give Raisa a big thank you because she's doing it right this very second.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Raisa.
And then while we drag this out, the worse her day is. Okay.
Fair. Fair.
Maybe just the longer.
Yeah. What I would recommend when you bring this to a motion is that, for each set of minutes to, as, with the corrections as discussed, and then you don't have to, enumerate out every single correction.
One thing that I had on the same October, page 9, and it's a comment of mine, was Chair Parks confirmed the conditions discussed are appropriate and that he didn't think the commission would be setting a good example for other applicants. I can't believe I would have said that. I'm not quite sure what the context was.
And that's on page 9. We'll highlight that and go back through the minutes and say that, because that seems out of character with what, that seems to not jive with what you were actually intending to say. So I have a feeling that there's a typo there.
Okay, and it's something I voted yes on, so it's, why would I say that and then vote yes? So yeah, if you could just have someone check that.
So given the number of items that you have questions on and motions and things like that with these minutes, is it best at this point to say, go back, fix all this stuff because of the motions, because of the findings, because of the votes and these other questions, fix it, and then you'll relook at it again?
My opinion would be yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Do we need to approve July though, since that's so far back?
If you're fine with July, yes, you can approve it.
I haven't really checked. Do you all, if you all reviewed July, and do you have the same sort of comments for that?
I think my only comments for July were this comments about who made and seconded particular motions.
Then can I make the recommendation, if those are your comments again, send those back too and let them be corrected.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I'll send them all back, and then once folks are back from vacation, they'll start to look at them. It will not be me, to be very clear.
All right.
Passing that job downhill.
While we're doing this, then look at September, and I think for September, I think those again were my only comments.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're going to punt then with the minutes. We're not going to vote on anything for that.
Yep, you're just sending them back with the comment that, well, I know what you said, and so I will pass that along, right? Motions, findings, and then the items that you specifically said needed to be corrected.
Right. We had identified a couple particular things as well.
Say that again, Mr. Bauer?
Yeah, we had identified a couple particular things.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. So.
Okay. And the last thing on our, just looking at the staff approval list, this is nice. I appreciate this.
Sure thing.
Nothing in here really jumps out as me saying, why did we staff approve that? It all seems pretty straightforward.
We tend to be sticklers.
But we appreciate both that staff has taken this off of us and doing it really well and then reporting on it. So all good.
Very good. Sure. Absolutely. Good.
I noticed you did have a slate roof tile replacement. Was that like a whole replacement of slate or just patching?
What's the address on that?
8 Mount Vernon.
Oh, yes. So that one is just, it's just a couple of, it's replacement in kind of just a few slates. So it's not the whole roof. It's just patching to repair. Yeah.
All right. Is that it for our agenda? Anything else? Minutes, staff approval, CPC. I think we're wrapped up. Anybody want to move to close our meeting?
Come on, Ryan. This is you. This is your cue.
I'd love to make a motion to end the meeting.
Seconded.
Hi, DJ. All in favor of stopping of Mr. Falvey's motion, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Do a roll call, Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kelly. Oh, we lost you. I assume that's a yes.
Look at the smile. That's a damn yes.
Frozen.
I think she's frozen.
That's
Locked
a
in
big
perpetuity. We'll move to Mr.
Yes.
Bauer,
Yes.
I heard the yes.
Mr. Chagnon,
Yes.
and I'll throw Ms. White in there
Yes.
just for good measure.
I won't say anything other than have a lovely Thanksgiving.
Yes.
You
And
too.
Thank
same-
you all.
I will say
Oh,
that.
yes, too.
I'll say one more thing, which is Ryan, I hope we did not hold you too long.
Not at all, Dick. Thank you. No, it's really interesting. And I appreciate all the effort that you're putting into the CPA. That's such important stuff. It's very interesting to hear that. So thank you for doing that. Really.
Yes, sir. And Eric too.
Yeah, well, I have to say my eyes kind of glossed over a little bit at listening in the hearing. So I've got to get caught up to speed with it.
Yeah.
Last
Thank you
time.
both.
Well, thank you all very, very much, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
You too.
Likewise.
See you all.
Thanks, everyone.
See you
Take care.
later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.